study diligently for years to become an expert. Others don't want to invest all that time. They just want to know the basic punches, holds, and throws. Just a few tricks that will work you out of pretty much any situation. That's what we're going to do tonight, with a twist. And that twist is the polygamy deniers. If you want to know some basic moves to defeat any polygamy denier, either at a debate or over dinner, you'll find what you're looking for here tonight on Mormonism Live.
Good evening, Mr. Radio Free Mormon. How are you?
Good evening, Bill Reel. How are you?
Good, good. That was, by the way, great intro. Folks can chime in for a second, but I think I gave you a false cue and you started, and I think it went live about 2 seconds after that. So if we missed a little bit of that beginning.
You gave me a false cue?
Yeah, I tried to say stop, start over, but once you get Radio Free Mormon going, there's no stopping him. So
when the guy behind the camera does this to the person who's on the set,
yeah,
that's when the person on the set thinks they're supposed to go.
When you do that thing, it's your responsibility. The tape is rolling, so it's my fault. I'll take the blame.
It was great, everybody. If you missed the first few words, they were the best part.
They were. Life treating you good?
Yes, better than I deserve.
Excellent. Excellent. I did want to make an announcement here before we jump in the show. You guys have got a great show tonight planned. This will be incredible.
When he says you guys, he often refers to me in the plural just as a sign of reverence.
Well, there's a special guest, and I was talking about those. I didn't know. Maybe you had changed your pronouns or something. Let's see here. So what we've got is we put this up on the screen. That's our thumbnail for tonight.
Those are my pronouns.
The prophet didn't do it. I just want to note we're putting an event on. This will be May 10th, Saturday, May 10th. Oh, wow. Radio Free Mormon is coming from the state of Washington.
I am.
You're going to come down and hang in Vegas and in southern Utah.
Oh my God.
So we have a night set aside, May 10th, 2025. RFM will be in southern Utah, Washington, Utah. And you and I, and also your ride from Vegas to here, Randy Bell, will be here in town, and we'll put on an event. I named this Unfiltered, a night with Radio Free Mormon and Bill Reel. And you can get tickets for this. I will put those into the chat. If anybody is either in southern Utah or would like to make the drive down and hang out with us for an evening, this will run from 6:30 p.m. Until 10 p.m. We do need to be out of the place at 10. So we've got 3.5 hours to have a fun time. And anything you want to add in terms of your thoughts around this event?
It sounds like a wonderful time, and hopefully just to be able to have, some conversation, some downtime, some unfiltered. I like that you named it that, Bill. Bill came up with that title, Unfiltered.
Yeah, and I'll just note too, you and I are open to, one of the things we talked about a few months ago is that we want to start making some rounds to areas where there are doubting, disbelieving, deconstructing Latter-day Saints. If you've got a friend group in some other place in Utah or Idaho or California, New York, wherever it is, if there's enough folks that could support an event, reach out to us at Mormon Discussions with an S on the end, podcast with an S on the end, at gmail.com. Mormon Discussions podcasts at gmail.com. And RFM and I will try to set up something where
we can't guarantee it, but we will try.
Yeah, we will try, and we'll make we'll give it the old college try and see if we can't make it happen. I'll put in the chat right now, folks, the link for that if you want to come to that. But there's limited seating, by the way. We're meeting in sort of a clubhouse. There's enough space here, I think, for easy 20, maybe 30 people.
So the Not Even Once clubhouse.
Yeah, so there's a limited number of tickets at the Not Even Once clubhouse. And folks, if you want to come to that, some of those tickets are already sold. We just announced this yesterday. So please do sign up. We'd love to see you. And hopefully, if you can't come to this, there's enough folks around you that maybe you could reach out and we can put an event together in your area. So
did you mention if food is involved?
Yeah. So the price of the
first thing I look for in these.
Yeah. Things. Yeah. The price of the ticket does include food. We'll have a nice meal that night. of one sort or another. We haven't settled on what that is yet, but that, and you'll have 3.5 hours for us to enjoy each other and get to know each other and to have time for whether it's questions or telling stories or just getting to know you and your journey and what's been going on in your life. So this should be a great chance to have some intimate time with Radio Free Mormon or myself or both of us. So we look forward to hearing from you.
And I'm excited because to top the evening off, we're going to drive over and TP Jody Hildebrand's house.
We might. I'm not going to say we're not going to do it. So there's that.
And if that should happen on May 10th, that her house gets TP'd, it's just an unlikely coincidence.
Yeah. Talking about coincidences, what do you have for us tonight, my friend?
What a segue. I have for you the other half of me, which is Dan Vogel. Dan, how are you doing?
Hello, everybody.
It is great to see you.
Here am I.
Okay, well, you are here tonight to lead us through. You're going to be Master Poe, okay, to my Kwai Chang Kane. And you're going to teach me these throws, these holds, right? Actually, what we have is we have eight issues that we have curated. And if you just know one, there's a couple of knockout punches in here, all right? And I'll identify them when we get to them, at least in my opinion, knockout punches. And there are others that are just, come on. The game is over before they even got in the ring.
Well, you don't want to make it sound too simple.
Oh, okay.
It's quite
This is very
complex.
difficult stuff. But we're going to make it so simple tonight that everybody can understand it. That is the goal, right?
Hopefully.
Yes. All right. Well,
It's
here
not a
is the
simple
first
topic.
Okay. Title of tonight's show, The Wacky World of Polygamy Deniers. So here's the problem. If you don't know what the problem is with this picture. Oh, the problem is that when you are using, in this case, a rifle, right? If you know how to use a rifle, okay, you're going to be much better off than if you don't know how to use a rifle. Because as soon as she hits the trigger on that thing, she's going to take that telescope right in her right eye. So that's a very, very bad position. And I know that's why she doesn't have her finger on the trigger. It's for fun. But this is the wacky world of polygamy deniers. They can take something that is useful as historical facts and use them in such a way as to injure themselves. All right. So let's go to the next one, and I'll go ahead. Oh, thank you so much.
I guess the metaphor would be if you don't know what you're doing in history, it could be dangerous.
Yeah. Number one. Now, this is the first one, and this is a common argument that I hear from Michelle. I think she really likes this. This is Michelle Stone. She's not the only one being featured tonight. We'll share the wealth, around the commentary. Joseph forbids plural marriage, ? Because she's looking at the history of the church or original documentation. She's got an argument to make here, which we will listen to.
But this is what was recorded in Joseph Smith's journal that was kept by Willard Richards while Joseph was alive. And if you see right here, I'll kind of blow it up. But it says, just right here, it says, evening at home, walked up and down the street with scribe and gave instruction to try those who were teaching the doctrine of plurality of wives on this law. Joseph forbids it and the practice thereof. No man shall have but one wife. So pretty clear, right? Joseph is laying down the law, which is consistent with the law given to the church in section 42, which is a man shall have but one wife, right?
No, that's not right.
Okay, so why isn't that right, Dan?
No, that's not right.
It seems perfectly clear to me.
I think we have a slide. Might help.
Oh, right.
There we
it
are.
goes. Thank you.
So I got it all laid out there. On the top left.
So the top left is what she just put up or on the
is
screen.
what she just read. And I underlined the key part where it says, on this law, God forbids it, and the practice thereof. So she wants to interpret it in the context of the two passages below. DNC 4222 and section 42 is known as the law.
Right,
So
section
she wants to
42.
go there. and she reads, thou shalt love thy wife with all thy heart and shalt cleave unto her and none else, which is a reflection of a passage in Genesis with Adam and Eve. And then the other one, which I can't see completely,
Hey,
but
Bill,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, yeah.
just on the side.
okay, there we
thank
go.
you.
Very
You're
good.
much better
Thank
at
you.
that time. Yeah.
This is the one that's usually quoted, but it's not the law, and it wasn't the revelation. So it's not the favored one, I guess, anymore. But we declare that we believe that one man should have have one wife and one woman, but one husband, which is the old 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, section 101. And that was the church policy. Okay. And that's closer to the wording.
Dan,
in
I'm sorry. Can I just see if I'm understanding, if I'm tracking why this is
Okay.
important and what her argument is and why your response to it is devastating? Okay. She's quoting what she's trying to do is she's trying to find a statement or something in a journal. This is Willard Richards' journal, I think she said, and about what Joseph Smith was saying, and that it actually says in the upper left-hand corner of all the different quotes, right? Brethren, some land, Eve at home, walked up and down street with scribe, and gave instruction to try those who were preaching, teaching, or preaching. Oh,
Yes,
lined
yeah.
out.
Yeah.
The doctrine of plurality of wives on this law. Now that looks like a period, or is that a comma on this law?
It's
Period. Joseph
They're all
forbids it in the
periods.
practice thereof. No man shall have but one wife. So what
So it's a sketchy journal. It's written kind of in a sketchy way.
oh yes.
And kind of not as clear. And
I think the significance is the when it says on this law.
yes.
And the question is, what does on this law mean? Because it's sort of sticking out of that to me like a sore thumb,
Yeah.
saying, what does that mean on this law? In other words, if it were blanket prohibition against plural marriage, you wouldn't need a clause in there that says on this law. It seems like it's a modifying clause,
Yes.
right? It's modifying the doctrine of plural. In other words, in some circumstances, on this law, no, but on another law, yes. So that's why it is important that you pointed out, if I followed you, that where she says on this law, she's trying to interpret that in terms of section 42, which is called the law, right? And has this verse in it, which she actually misquotes. She actually misquoted it. In other words, she had it being about plural marriage instead of being about adultery, as you put it in your video. And now you've got section 132, verse 7 over here, which is a much more likely referent to the law. Is that what your argument is?
Now, I want to preface this. This is not just me that interprets it this way. Brian Hales also interpreted it this way, and we kind of arrived independently at this same explanation for this passage. And so this is a favorite polygamy denier passage, and they read it as across the board denial of polygamy, that no one can practice polygamy, and that it should be understood in the context of these two previous statements that the church's position is against polygamy. But the key part to pay attention to in the passage, which the polygamy deniers overlook, is that it says on this law. So I say, what law? What is this law? It doesn't say on the law, according to the law, or referring to a previous law. It says on this law. What is that law? Well, it's in the next phrase. Joseph forbids it. Shouldn't it be God forbids it? No, it's Joseph that forbids it. And the practice thereof, no man shall have but one wife, which is the church policy. So when they prepared this for publication, because it's not in a publishable form, you can't just put that in the history of the church like it is. So they rewrote it in a way that would clarify it using D&C 132 verse 7. Okay, so when they clarified it, they wrote that gave instructions. This is Joseph Smith's journal, by the way, and the scribe walking up and down the street with Joseph Smith is Willard Richards, who keeps Joseph Smith's journal.
Mhm.
Gave instruction to try those persons who were preaching, teaching, practicing the doctrine of plurality of wives. For according to the law, I hold the keys of this power in the last days, and there is never but one on earth at a time on whom the power and its keys are conferred. And I have constantly said, no man shall have but one wife at a time, unless the Lord directs otherwise, which is in harmony with Jacob 2 in the Book of Mormon.
Can I jump in for just a moment?
Oh,
'Cause,
yes, Bill.
by the way, I think, let me say this too, to the audience. We're going to start off with some examples, but we are going to build up as we get towards the end. The most significant examples will be on the back end of the conversation. So I'm always trying to think about how the lay person would sit in this conversation and try to understand it. When he says that the others are out there teaching on the plurality of wives, and on this law, meaning section 132, which says that plural wives is allowed, but has to be commanded through the proper channels of the priesthood, that Joseph forbids these other people of going out and teaching this principle willy-nilly, and that anyone else teaching it outside the proper channels needs to do so in a monogamous fashion of one man, one wife. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Is this like another Hiram Page incident where Hiram Page is getting his own revelations outside of Joseph Smith, and he has to get rid of that so that the only revelations are able to be received through him?
Right. So Joseph has the authority to allow or not allow polygamous marriages, according to D&C 132 verse 7. That's why it says, on this law, Joseph forbids it, because he's the law in this matter. That's why D&C 132 verse 7, I have appointed unto my servant Joseph to hold this power in the last days, and there is never but one on earth at a time on whom this law and the keys of this priesthood are conferred. So that's what D&C 132 did. It gave the authority for Joseph to control polygamy, because there was unauthorized polygamous activity going on, and it was getting out of hand. So on this verse, the High Council could try people for their membership.
If they were teaching this out of line.
Yes, without Joseph's approval.
But Dan, is it fair to say that in the original journal there isn't anything about the preaching or teaching of the doctrine of plurality of wives that specifically says it's, without Joseph's approval?
Well, like I said, it's written in a choppy kind of fashion. That's why it had to be smoothed out before you could publish it. So what they did is use the revelation.
Oh, that was a question I had for you.
What was written in the journal.
They used the revelation to clarify what was written in the journal.
Yeah.
Franklin Richards, it was his journal. Do you know if it was Franklin Richards who did the history of the church here? In other words, was he interpreting his own journal?
No, but when they got to this part, Willard was not. He had died.
Oh, well, that makes it even more difficult, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll just note, this is the first one.
This is what they did do on a regular basis, I must add, is that the way that they weren't doing anything nefarious. This is how Joseph edited the history himself. He gave the materials to the scribes and the historian, which was Willard Richards, and they compiled it and they would review it with Joseph Smith. And they kind of reviewed it up to 1832, as far as I can tell, before Joseph Smith died. But it was written up to 1838 before he died. But so they just kept the same method after Joseph Smith had died.
Dan, I'm sorry. Was it written up to 1832 or 38 when Joseph Smith died?
It was written up to 1838, but Joseph Smith had reviewed. It was read to him, and he reviewed it and okayed it up to 1832 before he died. So they were writing it way ahead of where the revising. Whenever you read in Brigham Young's journal and other places revising the church history, well, they're just reviewing it. They're not. Brigham Young's not actually revising it. He will say, "Well, I don't want that in. Put this in instead," and things like that. That's what he called revising. But so when Joseph Smith died, the presidency took over the reviewing, and that was just to have, it's an institutional history they're writing. So all his institutional histories are to be looked at with a great deal of caution because they are serving the interests of that institution.
So then, if a polygamy denier friend brings up this argument, stay focused on those 3 words, on this law.
Yeah. On this law. What law? Well, on this, where is it in that passage? Where is the law on this law? Well, it's Joseph forbids it. That's the law. Not D&C 42.
Why was anybody practicing it? Or are you just saying it was only he forbids anybody else to practice it?
Okay, so according to sources, Hiram Smith read the D&C 132 to the High Council the following month. And that's because they were to start trying people that were doing it without authorization. They didn't haul Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, William Clayton before the High Council. They hauled other lesser lights before the council that were trying to practice polygamy without authorization.
Well, the only way I could think of to explain that from the polygamy denier's perspective is that Joseph Smith did not know that all the people who were practicing polygamy in Nauvoo who didn't get hauled in front of a council were actually practicing it.
There were people on the council who were practicing it. They were in the anointed quorum and things like that. So they knew who was authorized and who was not.
I'll add one more thing, which is I can see why the polygamy deniers would be confused by this one.
Yes.
And would interpret it the way that they do.
Mm-hmm.
And while you explained it, and I understand what's going on there, I could also understand why they might go, that's not enough. I still think this means what we think it means. I still think this is not this is not as strong as maybe I would want to see before I was convinced otherwise.
Right, but then they can't insist on their interpretation if there's another viable one which is stronger than theirs. This other interpretation is much stronger, especially if you believe D&C 132 was dictated before this entry in the journal.
So the journal is October 5th, 1843, and section 132 was that May of, what was that?
D&C 132, July 12th, 1843.
Okay, so it would have been dictated before this journal entry.
Yes.
Okay, well that works for your theory.
I'm not convinced, Dan. You're gonna have to convince me with stronger stuff.
Okay, now we're gonna bring in Kimberly Brown, who is a person I'm not sure I'd heard before, but she's in the polygamy denier camp along with Michelle Stone. Showed up on her show, and she wants to alleged. No, I think this is actually, yeah. We had so much material. I
Okay,
was
this
cutting
is
and editing and
this is
editing.
Michelle. This is
It's Michelle.
in this so I was interested in William Clayton's journals, and because it's a key evidence for Joseph Smith's polygamy, and I wanted to see what they have towards questioning the actual content of the journals. So what Kimberly Brown did was to go through the journals, every polygamy reference, and try to say that it's uncorroborated, mostly because these are private conversations between Clayton and Joseph Smith. And Clayton performs one of the not sealings, but marriage. It uses M for marriage. But I wanted to see if they could find some actual anachronisms in the journals, you know. So that's what Kimberly's goal was, to downgrade William Clayton as a witness, and to try to find, this is a typical methodology of polygamy deniers, is to hunt for anomalies.
Mhm.
So if they have a source they don't like, and they'll even do it with a reminiscence, because we expect reminiscences to be faulty in their memories of things, and they're going to stumble. And usually a historian will try to help these reminiscence by looking up documents and rehabilitating the witness, or just saying that they totally are wrong, or it could be that there's no way to determine. But the polygamy deniers will hunt for anomalies. And as soon as they find an anomaly, which is a really easy thing to do with a reminiscence, and they'll say this whole thing is no good and throw it out. And
Right. Any
they don't do
anomaly
it with other
anywhere.
sources that they like.
Yeah, any anomaly anywhere is a justification to throw out any evidence of polygamy anywhere or everywhere. That's
Right.
what, and it's so strange, but you'll see this great example. And Dan taught me something that I learned as a process of watching his response to this particular argument.
Next, Stone tries, unsuccessfully, to produce an anachronism to prove Joseph Smith's journal kept by Willard Richards was similarly tampered with.
This is an interesting thing to me that kind of shows the same thing that you are showing in Clayton's journal, just these dates that don't match up. So this is Saturday, May 20th, 1843. And the reason this caught my attention is because he says, in the office, heard Brother Phelps read a definition of the word Mormon, more good, corrected and sent to press. And so I thought that was fascinating because, of course, it reminded me of President Hinckley's October 1990 conference talk, Mormon Means More Good, which was a response to the previous conference, right? This is the text of the talk. And they added the Joseph Smith, that this was printed in the Times and Seasons. And I hadn't seen that source yet. And so I went ahead and found the Times and Seasons where this was printed. And if you look at the date, May 15, 1843, and this gives a long discussion in this about the name of the church. This is what's interesting. This was published in the newspaper May 15, 1843. And if you look again at the journal entry, it's May 20th, right? So it says that Brother Phelps Brother Phelps came up with a definition of why Mormon meant more good, and then they corrected it and sent it to
Can
press.
you stop this for a second, Bill?
And yet,
Thank you very much. So if I'm understanding the argument, which I had to really think about a lot to understand it because it has to do with time, right? But what she's saying is that the journal entry about Mormon meaning more good is dated May 20th, and the journal entry itself says it was sent to the press, okay? But May 20th is 5 days after the newspaper in which that more good thing appeared, okay? So it's like they went back in time 5 days. But to explain to the audience, okay, it's not about time travel. What it is they're trying to do, and if I understand correctly, Dan, is they're saying that this entire history was rewritten from beginning to end, basically, to include Joseph practicing polygamy, even though he didn't really do it. And this was the deed they were doing by rewriting the history and writing it into it, right?
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, if they did that, then they're going to make mistakes because it's 5, 10, whatever years later. They can't remember everything. They get things out of order that end up contradicting the physical evidence, like the date of the newspaper. And aha, we have an example here of something that that shows to them that the history actually was rewritten at a later date and is not contemporary. Because if it were contemporary, they would have known not to date it May 20th, but instead May 14th, the day before the newspaper article, instead of 5 days after. Is that their argument?
Well, they're just looking for anomalies and say, oh, that's awful fishy. There's something going on here. We don't know exactly what, but it seems like this, Joseph Smith journal's really written by Willard Richards. And then it looks like maybe it was tampered with in some way. And if that's tampered with, and this doesn't make sense, we caught them in a red-handed, altering documents, then you can't rely on that polygamy material. And it was all added, and it's a big conspiracy. So,
are you saying I was giving them too much credit by making such a forceful and coherent argument?
Well, I think were you going to keep on playing her?
Oh, yeah.
Spiel?
Thank you, Dan. We will do that. We'll get that up there on the screen.
I'm going to back it up just the tiniest bit.
Yes.
That way we can pick that up here.
So we all agree on what the evidence is, but they're going to take it in a certain way, and then Dan is going to give a hard reality check.
Good.
Next,
Oh, wait,
Stone tries.
I don't know why it did that.
That's why I put the timestamps up there at the top.
Yeah.
Brother Phelps came up with a definition of why Mormon meant more good, and then they corrected it and sent it to
Is it on the
May
screen?
20th. And yet we can look at the dates and see it was published on May 15th. So it couldn't have been brought and sent to press on May 20th. And these are the kinds of things that we are looking at going, there is funny business here. I don't know exactly how to explain any of this other than Willard Richards' version of Joseph Smith's journal also has problems, I think, need to be acknowledged. And that's just one of the recent ones that I stumbled upon.
The only thing that needs to be acknowledged is that Stone really doesn't know these sources as well as she thinks. If she knew anything about the times and seasons, she would know that they were chronically behind schedule. The fastest way to determine this is to carefully check the dates of the other items in the same issue, especially in the correspondence section. In this case, all she had to do is look across the page and see that this issue includes a letter to the editor dated 19th of May, 1843, which is 4 days after the publication date. In the future, try to be more careful, Michelle.
Wow. Okay. So, Dan.
Well, that brings up another matter, message I have for the polygamy deniers. I remember Bill and I did a very long and elaborate exchange with Clark Abood, and he's a polygamy denier, as well as a conspirator theorist on Joseph Smith's murder by John Taylor. And so, but I noticed in there that they need to fact check themselves a lot, because a lot of his evidence, which was filtered or distilled from other polygamy deniers such as Michelle Stone, was riddled with just simple fact errors of fact, errors of interpretation.
So if I'm understanding you correctly,
yeah,
what you're saying is that the Times and Seasons got behind in its
Yeah.
publication. So let's say it's May 22nd and they're putting out the May 15th issue. Is that what you mean?
yeah,
Because that's the only way you can have a letter in there that's dated May 19th
right.
in a Times and Seasons newspaper with the publication date of May 15th.
Exactly. So they have to put on the masthead the date. It came out bi-monthly, on the 1st and the 15th of every month. But they got behind in their production schedule, but they still kept the publication date as the same.
So when you know that, and when you can see what you saw and pointed out to the rest of us, Willard Richards' diary doesn't contradict the publication date of the Times and Seasons. It's actually corroborated by it in an unexpected way.
Right.
All
So,
right, let's see about the next. Did you want to say anything else?
Michelle, in responding to this video, Michelle said, "I'm very aware of the problems with this video." And she said she corrected him somewhere, but I don't know where. She didn't mention it in the description to the video. So people are happily looking along these videos with all these mistakes in them. And she knows there's mistakes, but she doesn't do anything to correct them.
If she recognized her mistakes, she would believe that Joseph practiced polygamy. Now, the Nauvoo Expositor affidavits, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is from 2 years ago. It's the ghost of polygamy past. But very quickly, all right, in the Nauvoo Expositor, which was published on June 7th, 1844, prior to Joseph Smith's death on June 27th of that same month, there were 3 affidavits that described a document that all 3 of these people said that they saw, and that it was the revelation about plural marriage. There's the affidavits where they appear in the broadsheet of the Nauvoo Expositor. Those 3 people were William Law, Jane Law, and Austin Cowles. And when you look at what they say in description of the document they claim to have seen, it ends up lining up with section 132. One of them is yellow. You can see where that is. One's blue, one's green. It is throughout and in very specific ways as well, including the number of virgins, which is at 10 in DNC 132. And that's what Jane Law said as well, 10 virgins. So all of these things get corroborated by these 3 witnesses. So how does that happen if Joseph Smith isn't involved in polygamy? And indeed, if this revelation, as the polygamy deniers insist and have to insist, was written after Joseph Smith's death by someone under Brigham Young's direction. So in 1852, he could, in their words, pull it out of his desk and bring it forward as if it were a revelation from Joseph Smith. How does he do that when we have the evidence that it was current and existing before Joseph's death? So that is that argument. And I think that is, that's a good argument. What do you think, Dan and Bill?
Well, I love the way you handled this, and I refer to it myself in some of my videos. Good job. I think it's, well, Michelle Stone said, it's the strongest evidence the pro-polygamy side has.
Okay, that's because we win. This argument alone wins it. All right.
I think so. Well, it proves that all the elements, even the stuff that deals with polygamy, because they try to say on July 12th, 1843, Joseph Smith did dictate revelation,
but it was only about
just
eternal
about
marriage.
eternal marriage. Yeah. Well, this shows you that in the Nauvoo Expositor, they claim to have heard it read before the High Council, or they took it home, actually, the laws, and Jane Law read it also soon after it was dictated. And then they spoke about it on June 7th, 1844 in this publication here. And that doesn't leave a lot of time because...
No, and the beauty of it, is it's in a freaking newspaper.
Yeah.
And we know when it was published. Well, it has the date on the newspaper. Maybe they were behind too, Dan. I don't know. But no, we know from history that it actually was published on that date because it caused a huge firestorm, which ended up leading to Joseph Smith as the mayor of Nauvoo, and the city council ordering it as a public nuisance, and it had to be abated.
This is actually and of course you guys have just said it. This is really a strong one. What Michelle and the polygamy deniers do is they can't get rid of the newspaper. This is here. They can't erase this. So what they have to do is imagine that William and Jane Law and what's the third person's name, if you guys remember off the top of your
Austin
head?
Cowles.
Austin Cowles. The three of them make up a story about a fake revelation that Joseph Smith is putting out, something that is meant to put fire on Joseph Smith, even though he's not doing any of this. And then Brigham Young is later on taking the Nauvoo Expositor newspaper that gives him details that he can then work back in to a section 132. And that, I just think that's such an absurd thing to do.
You'd be taking the words of lie. First off, it would never happen. Okay. Let's just start with that. Never in a million years. Second off, even if we presume that he considered something like that, why would he be taking the words of liars and apostates against Joseph Smith, right? To make a revelation. No, it's insanity all the way around. You can always come up with an excuse, but the problem is the likelihood of that excuse actually happening in the real world is vanishingly small. It's never happened.
And the thing that you pointed out when you did all of the work on this is that William and Jane Law and Austin Cowles are naming the most problematic aspects of Section 132, and it seems natural. They're the pieces that would have stood out to them. What was abhorrent to them were the things that they are screaming to the newspaper to print is, hey, this is what was in there. And so you have Brigham Young, if he's using this material later to create a Section 132, he already has the most problematic parts of 132 handed to him, which also makes it so it doesn't make any sense.
And why are they doing this? Why are they publishing this newspaper with this information in it, which is putting them at odds with the leaders of the church, right? At least the ones who are practicing polygamy. Why are they inviting all this scorn, all this calumny, all this pain upon themselves? They live in the Mormon city of Nauvoo, and they're publishing this freaking newspaper. The reason they're doing it is because they're mad. Why are they mad? Well, they say why they're mad, and they say it in the newspaper that they're publishing. So it's not like this was a good thing for them, or it helped them in some way, or it got them money or prestige. This is, in legal terms, I think this is a statement against their interest. It's a statement they're making that's going to work against any of their interests in this world, right? So I think that this is very, very solid. And thank you, but I'm ready to go on because I want to get to some more of these things.
Well,
Dan
I
came
want
up
to
with.
add just one little part.
Oh, please, go ahead.
That is an added wrinkle in their story, which is that Clayton is the original scribe for DNC 132, and as the story goes, Emma burnt that, but they had made a copy, and Joseph Kingsbury is the one that made the copy, which we now have, which Brigham Young used to publish DNC 132. Well, Joseph Kingsbury copied it within a couple of days of July 12th when Clayton wrote it, and he left Nauvoo on the 25th of that same month and didn't come back to Nauvoo until after Joseph Smith's death. So it would have had to have been written before he left, and during the time he was gone, the Laws and Cowles published a description of what the revelation said. So when are they going to add the polygamy part when the copy we have was written within a couple of days after Clayton wrote it? It doesn't make any sense that there's two revelations.
Okay. So William Clayton is the scribe who wrote the original down, and he mentions it in his journal, writing it down. It was 11 pages or something, very long. that
10.
he wrote, and it dealt with this subject. He doesn't give the whole revelation. He writes that this is what happened, and he wrote it
Yeah.
down to Joseph, and it had to do with how it was that David was justified in having plural wives or many wives, I think. And so you've got this document, right? And now this has got to be before Emma burns it up, right? You can't
They
make a
make the
copy of
copy.
something that's in ashes.
Yeah.
So, but Joseph Kingsbury then makes a copy of this revelation, which is section 132. He makes a copy before the one that Clayton made originally is destroyed.
Mhm.
So that's the only copy that we have. But what you're saying is that Kingsbury left Nauvoo by the 25th of July, 1843.
3.
And this was July 12th, it was received.
Yes.
So that's what, 13 days later?
Yes.
Okay, so 13 days later, he leaves and he doesn't come back until after Joseph is dead.
Right.
So your question then is, how could he have added in the plural marriage stuff?
It
Help
would
me
have
out now.
had to have been added before he left, because we have William Law. We don't know what copy actually that they read. Okay. But they read the Revelation and they describe it in the newspaper during the time that Joseph Kingsbury is gone.
You're
So-
presuming that the document that all the three affidavits in the Nauvoo
Mhm.
Expositor, those three people, the document they saw was the Kingsbury copy.
I don't know which one.
Okay.
So, or I don't know exactly the timing that they saw it. I don't know when Emma supposedly burned it. I mean, we have a high and low date, but so it would have the revelation that they read had to have been written before Kingsbury left. And so here's the date that they usually try to give. Clayton's journals are forged in 1845 or 1850s. And Clayton's the one that describes the revelation. And
Bill, are you following this? I'm afraid it's going over my head a bit.
okay?
I am not, only because you guys were originally talking about Austin Cowles, Jane, and William and Jane, and I
Yeah.
went looking for the name of the person who also reports exactly what's in the section 132, Leonard Sobey, who had left the church and become a Rigdonite, and I
Right.
wanted to have that name ready to add in if there was a place to in this conversation. So I did miss the last 40 seconds of whatever this was, and so you'll have to maybe just slow down and help us make sense of this.
I followed it so far. I'm trying to understand the significance. I don't get the connection yet, Dan. Could you try it again?
Well, it narrows down the date. So
Well, why couldn't he have written it afterward? Because he didn't have the other one to make a copy of?
supposedly? that
Okay, so
Emma
the
had
idea is
burned-
he would have
had
had to have
burned
been
it.
in Nauvoo where the copy is that William Clayton made, the original, in order to
But-
copy it.
If he made his copy later, it doesn't matter because we have the laws telling us that it talks about polygamy in 1844. So his copy has to have been done before he left.
Yeah,
Am
I'll
I
only know.
understanding it correctly that he had to copy it from the other document that was in existence there, and he couldn't copy it after he left because he wouldn't have something to copy?
If you believe that Emma burned the copy, yeah. But they'll dispute that story. They don't believe that
Holy
story.
smokes. Thank you,
They don't believe
Randy.
this.
Wow. Sorry, Dan.
So you get that you can't have two revelations, one that's eternal marriage and one and that they added the polygamy part in, because we have the laws mentioning the polygamy part already.
Mm-hmm.
So if the polygamy part was added, it would have had to been done before Kingsbury left town.
Okay, I think I'm starting to understand what you're saying. It's going more toward this idea that the polygamy deniers have of this
Mhm.
hypothesized separate revelation that Joseph Smith actually that we don't have, but God knows it's anything but 132. But it's something else that's not plural marriage. It's just eternal marriage, right? And
Yeah.
this argument is addressed toward that distinction they try and make and show that the copy of Kingsbury had to have been made before he left town on
Mhm.
July 25th, and
Mhm.
it already contains the stuff about plural marriage.
So the polygamy deniers usually try to date Kingsbury's copy to Utah
Right.
right before Brigham Young pulls it out of his desk. So
Okay.
this having the laws mention that the revelation that they read it mentioned polygamy dates Kingsbury's copy to before he left.
Okay. I think I get it now. Now, Kingsbury, he went west with the Saints.
Yes.
Okay. And here's this one. Now, this is from Rob Fotheringham.
Yeah.
It's an O, Fotheringham. I think it'd be pronounced the same either way. Rob Fotheringham. And this is from a video you made called How Not to Fake a Revelation. And this is where he's trying to argue that Section 132 is a forgery. And by that, I mean the same one we're talking about, right?
Kingsbury copy.
Yes.
Yes. He's
Yes,
trying to
he's
say
on
that there's
Kingsbury
two
copy.
different scribes that
Right.
wrote on it.
And now
And-
that Dan has
yeah.
told us about what they do, they just look for anomalies or strange things. This is a classic case of this, and see if you can spot what it is that Rob Fotheringham is doing, because they all do the same kind of thing.
And yet, in Kingsbury's inconsistent accounts, he consistently claimed that he alone copied the entire revelation. Let's consider evidence that this too was a lie. The Kingsbury document, as it's called, consists of nearly 8 pages of handwritten text, shown here. It seems that, upon inspection, the entire document does not appear to have been created by the same person. Of the approximately 7 3/4 pages of total manuscript text, the first 7 1/4 pages appear to have been written by one person using brown ink, and the last half page of text appears to have been written by a different person using black ink.
The brown ink is iron gall ink, where the iron has oxidized or rusted. So at most, we can only say that different inks were possibly used, but it may be that the lines of the second part are thinner and less oxidized and not necessarily different ink. He may have simply sharpened his quill. Does this mean that the two sections were written by different scribes, as Fotheringham will argue? Of course not.
So let's take a look at the last page, page 8, because it's here that the anomalies begin to show up. This
Anomalies.
is a close-up of page 8. At the top of the page, we note that the ink is brownish in color. In the first 5 lines, we see similar, consistently sized and shaped letters. But on the 6th line, we see an abrupt transition right after the paragraph sign identified in the red box to what looks like a different color of ink, in this case black ink, as well as a new writing style that is noticeably smaller in size that uses much finer lines compared to the brown text above. Clearly, some type of break or change occurred in the creation of the document.
Okay, so if I understand this argument, he's saying, well, Kingsbury said in this one statement, I guess much later, that he wrote out the entire revelation. He copied the entire revelation. But now he's looking at the revelation that he says he copied and saying, look, it looks somebody else did this last little bit here at the end, right?
Right.
Somebody else. So therefore, liar. You are a liar, Kingsbury. We have caught you in your lie, which I guess means that Joseph didn't practice polygamy.
Well, it's a forged revelation. How not to fake a revelation is what the title of his video was. How not to fake a so he's saying this is a fake revelation, and he dates this Kingsbury copy to after Whitney, Noel K. Whitney died in 1850, and Brigham Young announced it in public in 1852. So somewhere in those 2 years, Fotheringham believes Kingsbury made this forgery.
Why was Whitney's death important?
So, yes, thank you. So when Kingsbury copied this, the actual time being a couple of days, April 15th, or as I say, July, 15th, 2 or 3 days after Clayton had originally written it. Whitney and Kingsbury worked for Whitney in the red brick store. Joseph Smith's upstairs, his office is upstairs. Clayton's there. That's probably where they dictated the revelation originally. Then Whitney asked Joseph Smith if he could make a copy, and Joseph Smith says he didn't mind, and so Whitney gave it to Kingsbury to copy. So that's why it's in his handwriting, because Whitney wanted it, and it was in his family.
Mm-hmm.
It was kept with his family papers, and he had his one of his sons copy it at Council Bluffs to make another copy of it, because he was going to hand it over to Brigham Young. But at any rate, Fotheringham, not a very good handwriting analyst, and he tries various ways to make the two handwritings look different, but it's very kind of amateurish way he goes about doing it. But over here on the far right, I have verses 1 through 60, and the smaller writing is verses 61 to 66. And I mostly focus on the initial letters, and you can see the similar letters, the formation of the letters, like the B there, and what's really telling, quick tell, is the W and the V's. He has begins with the little loop and then goes into the W or the V, and that's in both places.
Yeah.
And the G, this is a one way of making a capital G back then.
No,
and
95% were written by the same person.
It's very obvious. And I've also looked very closely at his journal at BYU. It's online, but it's at BYU, so you can look at a whole journal of his writing and really get a feel for it. Anyway,
that's what I was going to ask. Does he have other writing out there as a sample that could be used by a forensic handwriting analyst?
Yeah, right. Yes,
they would say it's the same guy.
Yeah. Well, look, the Joseph Smith papers people say it's the same guy. It's obviously the same guy. It's not really that hard to tell.
No, it isn't. You're right. So here's Martha Brotherton, the Joseph Smith doppelganger. I love this story. It actually could be like an adventure story for young adults. Martha Brotherton and the Joseph Smith doppelganger. What do you think? No, this is Martha Brotherton, who's one of these women who comes to Nauvoo. She doesn't stay here that long because she's approached by Joseph Smith, along with Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball, I believe in the upper room of the brick store, the red brick store. And she's tried to be put into plural marriage, and she says no. And then she ends up leaving, okay, but she leaves a declaration, an affidavit, which gets published by John C. Bennett, I believe, about what happened. And so what this is very, very strong evidence. I mean, that book and the affidavit was published while Joseph Smith was still alive, right? I got that right, don't I, Dan?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's why Joseph Smith was so mad about it, that whole book. So this affidavit is
42.
published, and Michelle Stone, who's the one who addressed this, takes it at face value as being true. Okay, the story related by Martha Brotherton is true. It's just that she didn't really see Joseph Smith. It's that Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball brought along somebody else and just said that this was Joseph Smith. They pretended it was Joseph Smith. That's her way to get out of this one. Now, this is from a podcast I did on this subject couple years ago. I got the part here, the clip where she is making her argument. And the interesting part to me is that she simultaneously recognizes that what she's saying is insane. I think that's the word she used. You may say I'm crazy. You may say I'm insane, which is a tacit acknowledgement that a reasonable person would think that. You may say I'm crazy. You may say I'm insane, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And when you got a person who says that insane stuff makes sense to them, Houston, we have a problem. So let's play this and see if it really is the way I described it. Is true. Going on with the tape.
We'll leave it there. But Martha Brotherton, even though her story comes through Bennett, I do believe her story, and it makes me so angry. I really I just want to go to battle for Martha Brotherton. I hate what happened to her. And I think it matters that we have the right perpetrators, right? That we accuse the right people. So again, it's covered in Rob's video, but I'll just explain really quickly my thinking and a couple of things. When you read through Martha Brotherton's affidavit, a couple of things become very clear. She had never met Joseph Smith. She'd never seen Joseph Smith. She didn't know who he was. There's this really weird time crunch that seems to be happening, this full court press that's almost like, hurry, hurry, decide. Maybe because they only had the free use of the store for that long until Joseph would get back from wherever maybe he was. This is what seems like the most likely scenario to me. When I hear Joseph Smith, when I hear Martha Brotherton's report of what Joseph Smith said, it does not sound like Joseph Smith. This is just a small thing, and I don't want people to make fun of it. I'm just throwing it out there because it's the easiest one to explain. But I have read through quite a bit, and I've never heard Joseph Smith call anyone sis, right? He calls her sis, and he's kind of got this attitude. It's weird. I think that Brigham and Heber had access to the store, and there was a third collaborator who was pretending to be Joseph Smith. And yes, you can say that's insane, that's crazy. I think it makes perfect sense, and it fits so well because it's really hard to make sense of this one. I know we talk about the pattern and it fits into the pattern, but again, please consider that is circular reasoning. You believe the pattern exists, so you see the pattern because you know it exists. So you think that the pattern gives these things more credibility. I strongly disagree with you, and I think you should consider that level of circular reasoning. And if there are other things that would be better explanations, again, I'd like to dig into this more, and I recommend Rob's video, but I think it's worth considering. It doesn't convince me. I think that both Martha Brotherton and Joseph Smith were telling the truth. I think Martha Brotherton was telling the truth in her affidavit, and I think Joseph Smith was telling the truth when he was like, I didn't do this. I cannot figure out why she's saying I did this. I believe both of them because I think that there were other people causing problems. It's like, when there are those people that just cause problems and everyone's kind of a victim of them because
those people, those problem causers. I told you she said that. She said exactly those words. You may think it's crazy. You may think it's insane, but it makes sense to me.
Did she say everyone else is using circular reasoning? I
Yes.
mean, every
Yes.
argument that these guys go, well, I know that says he's practicing polygamy, but I have to get rid of that, and I'll come up with a reason because I need Joseph Smith not to be a polygamist.
Mhm.
Seems like circular reasoning.
By the way, this whole thing about she didn't know Joseph Smith, she'd never seen Joseph, all that's made up. You understand that, right? All that's part of her pulling it out of thin air.
Yeah. Smith never said that.
She just came into town
3 weeks before.
Yeah, but she stayed around and saw Joseph Smith after that.
Right. If she didn't see him before, she saw him out. And that's one of the things I said. Okay. Even in the very unlikely circumstance that they're having some guy come in there and say, hey, I'm Joseph Smith, sis.
But if
not
you,
really
you
Joseph.
assume Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy or approve of polygamy, then any explanation can
Mhm.
work.
Yes. And this is extremely far-fetched. This is vanishingly, remotely, even not likely.
Well, I have to say that I've written 2 biographies of Joseph Smith,
Yes.
but I
Yes.
could never say Joseph Smith would never have done whatever.
So how often did he say sis? And you know, she,
Or he
and
wouldn't have did. This doesn't sound like him.
the other thing is she conflates Joseph Smith saying sis with Martha Brotherton reporting that he said sis, which is probably not a word that's going to stick out to her in the conversation where she's being proposed to as a plural wife.
Who knows what Joseph Smith was like on a casual, personal basis? I've written 2 biographies, and I still don't know what he would be like. I would like to actually go in a time machine and see that, because I have no idea.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Someone who knows him as well as you do.
I don't feel like I know him all that well, really.
Well, if not you, man, who? Wow. I tell you, I still don't care what anybody says. I do not think Joseph Smith committed suicide in the Carthage jail. Okay. So are we ready to go to the next one?
You mean Hiram?
Yeah. Oh, by the way, the other thing I wanted to say about this, about patterns, there's actually a rule of evidence that goes contrary to what it was she was talking about there. If you have a pattern, okay, if you have a pattern in the way you commit a crime, so much so that it's a signature, and you commit another crime which has the same components of the signature, normally the first crime will not come in as evidence, okay, because it's going to prejudice the jury. But this is one of those exceptions, which is if there is a signature crime that fits the pattern sufficiently so that a reasonable juror could look at the first one and say, you know, I bet the same guy who committed that first one, which was, you know, the defendant committed the second one, which is what the defendant's on trial for. Yeah, it's admissible. It's called evidence, Michelle. It's not circular reasoning. It's the law. Okay, now we can go to the next one. New?
Yeah. So do you guys want to go through? There's a few slides here with just images and stuff like that on it.
I want to talk a little bit about the Gap Journal. Okay.
Can I preface this?
Yeah.
Who is this guy
Who is this guy?
on the right?
This is all William Clayton. That was when he was much younger.
Oh,
I just want to note to the audience again. I think Martha Brotherton is a strong example of evidence for Joseph Smith being the originator of polygamy, and I know what she's trying to do, what she has to do. There's a certain way you have to come to that story that you have to dismiss it in a certain way, because you can't dismiss Martha Brotherton. The fact that she wrote something that John C. Bennett recorded it, that holds up. I think some of the examples earlier, Dan, I think you make a strong case for the way we should interpret the historical context, but I can see how they wiggle out of it. It's at this point where I think things start to get interesting.
Okay, so Dan, will you tell us about William Clayton, his journals, and then introduce us to the idea of the Gap Journal?
Okay, here's our friend Jeremy Hoop.
Yes, another person, another polygamy
Jeremy
denier.
Hoop, the actor. Still, well, he has a show called Still Mormon, so he kind of played Still a Mormon who denies Joe Smith was a polygamist.
I didn't know he had that show. Thanks for explaining that. That's funny.
It's well produced, and
good.
he's even a voice actor, so he's got a good presentation.
Okay, good.
And he's not dummy or anything, but I just don't think I think he needs to get a little more historical methodology training. But Clayton's journals. So Jeremy is struck by how neat they look. So I'm giving you 2 pages here. See how neat they are. So they must have been copied. You know,
I'm not even sure we're
So here
exactly to that point yet. If you could just tell the audience who William Clayton is.
Oh, William.
Well,
we already talked about him. So William Clayton, he was for a time Joe Smith's personal secretary when Willard Richards left town for a while. But he was a really good record keeper, as you can see. He was much better than Willard Richards, put it that way. He kept mostly the records he kept were like temple records, the law of the Lord records, land records, the Masonic lodge records, the Council of 50 records. He's pretty big in where it comes into play with record keeping. He even kept Joseph Smith's journal while Willard Richards was out of town. So
Are William Clayton's journals published yet?
no. So we have right here, we're going to be talking about, there's 3 Nauvoo journals, but we're going to be talking about 2 of the main ones. And this becomes the focus because it mentions polygamy.
Dan, I'm so sorry. I just know there's questions that people will have because I would
Yeah,
have them
go
myself,
ahead.
which is, how do we have images of his journal if they haven't been released?
Oh, good question. So yeah, they haven't been released. I begged to see them when I was doing the critical edition of the history of the church, because I wanted to check against Clayton's journal for the sources, because I checked the whole history of the church against every source they used, except for the Clayton journals. But so Clayton's journals, the Joseph Smith Papers people needed them for some of Joseph Smith's sermons, because he recorded Joseph Smith's sermons on several occasions, and the Joseph Smith Papers people want to include photos of every document that they transcribe, and that's how we get them in online in the Joseph Smith Papers collection. So you can look under documents, 1842, 43, and 44, and see Joseph Smith's sermon on such and such day, April 3rd, let's say, of 1843, in Macedon, and other ones where it gives Willard Richards' version, Wilford Woodruff's version, and William Clayton's journal. So that's how we got these, and there's quite a few. Jeremy goes through, he collected about maybe 50, 60
but these are
pages.
the sermons, and they're published in order so that people can compare it to their transcription for verification.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Why haven't the journals of William Clayton been published? Damn it.
Why
is the church hiding these?
Well, who knows? We haven't been able to see.
I just want to make sure everybody knows that the church has had these journals of a very intimate scribe with Joseph Smith, who was present for a lot of stuff, including practicing plural marriage.
Yeah.
So he an incredible record keeper, as Dan has explained, and they've got multiple journals, 3 from Nauvoo, and I think there's a Temple journal and some others going across the plains and into Utah. But why don't we have these journals published? What is it in those journals that the church doesn't want us to know about? That's my question.
Well, there's a lot of intimate stuff in there that Joseph Smith shares with Clayton, and Clayton shares his problems. So you'll see one of the journals called the Gap Journal by Jeremy.
Yes, now the Gap Journal.
Yeah, the
Can you
Gap
explain
Journal.
what this Gap Journal? I know that Jeremy called it
next
a
slide.
Gap
Next
Journal,
slide.
but it's not a bad name for it. It's kind of
No, because it is literally fills a gap.
This is super important, everybody. So please pay attention to this Gap Journal.
So Bill,
this is actually going to be another hugely important evidence that Joseph Smith did practice polygamy.
That's it. So you get another page. I'll be showing a few pages here and there. You get the idea. So there's Journal 1, which covers the 27th of November, 1842 to 28th of April, 1843. And then there's a gap of 17 months, almost a year and a half, to the 24th of September, 1844. It just kind of skips. There's no blank page as far as I know. It just skips to the September 1844 to the 31st of March, 1845. Then there's a whole nother journal that Hoop calls the Gap Journal, and it's the 25th of April, 1843 to the 24th of September, 1844. So it fits right in there.
So it covers the gap.
Yeah, it covers the gap. And Jeremy likes to say that this is all the salacious stuff of dealing with Joseph and Emma Smith's marriage and some of Joseph Smith's marriages to polygamous wives that Clayton happened to officiate at. And it also, Joseph Smith shared problems he was having with Emma, and Emma was threatening to divorce him at one point, and some other matters. And Clayton talks about his own problems. His Clayton's story is not favorable about polygamy because he experienced a lot of problems with it, with the second wife being very depressed and not happy with her situation. And because it was presented to her as a commandment from God by revelation, and they entered into a covenant, Clayton went to ask Joseph Smith to help Margaret. Margaret Moon was his second wife, and Ruth Moon was his first wife. So they were sisters.
Oh.
And Margaret was not happy, but they were under covenant. It was according to a revelation. And Clayton went to Joseph Smith and asked him if he could release him or release Margaret from the covenant. He was willing to let her go. And Joseph said no. So it doesn't put polygamy in a favorable light, which is what I explain as why this information is in a separate journal. So
Dan, can I take you back just a second? And I apologize. If I'm William Clayton, then we've got two journals here, right? Journal 1 and then the Gap Journal, otherwise known as Journal 2, but the Gap book, okay? So if I'm William Clayton, this is the common understanding and your understanding and historians' understanding and the people at the Joseph Smith Papers Project's understanding is that here is, what's his name? Clayton. Here's William Clayton. He's doing the journal. He's doing the journal. He's doing the journal in his journal, okay?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, he gets to the part where he's getting married to his second plural wife, right?
That's right.
And he stops. He's in the middle of this journal, this one journal that he's writing. He stops there. He goes and he gets a brand new journal.
Yep.
And in that journal now, he starts writing from that point on. And he fills up that second journal.
Yep.
And that second journal takes 17 months to fill up. Then he comes back to the original first journal that he started with, where he stopped on that date in April of 1843. It's now September of 1844, and he writes down September 1844, and he begins continuing again in the first journal. Is that right?
That's right.
Well, this is a huge anomaly. So, of course, when the polygamy deniers see this, it must mean that Joseph didn't practice polygamy. But now we've got the basics, and now I think everybody's going to be able to understand what it is that you have to say about this. So,
yeah,
what do you have to say here?
Were Clayton's journals rewritten in 1845, according to Jeremy, and about 1850, according to Fotheringham, and it seems like Michelle Stone also thinks it's the journal was created in Utah.
And by the way, they have to say this, right, Dan? They have to say this because polygamy is, well, it's through, especially the Nauvoo journals, and especially the Gap book, the Gap Journal, Journal 2. It's like, it's prevalent. So for the polygamy deniers' point of view, you got William Clayton, who is the scribe of Joseph Smith at the time, and is taking this stuff down. This can't have been written contemporaneously.
No, if Joseph Smith didn't live polygamy, these have to be fake.
So they have to be fake. So they will do whatever they can to prove that these are fake. And it's a Gap journal. And how crazy is that? So it must be fake. But you say to them, what?
I say that the Gap journal proves that they are contemporary. Because even though it's neat, so contemporary, what is contemporary? Is contemporary, if you make a rough draft, that's contemporary, but if you polish it up, is it still contemporary? Yes. It's still contemporary. If you draw notes, take notes, and make a journal, okay. And they need to understand there's a difference between a diary and a journal. Diary is one of those things you write once, and it changes ink and it's messy. That's a diary. A journal is something that's more polished, okay. And
It is supposed to be the church history, for crying out loud.
well, he knows his journals are going to be used
Yes.
as early as 1843. He knows, and they start using him. They start using his journals in 1845 in the rough draft of the history. Willard Richards and the other scribes start utilizing his journals, so they already have them.
So the first thing you're saying is, why would you make a gap volume in the first place? In other words, you can look back at it and say, yeah, that looks weird, and I'm not going to pay attention to any reasons why that might make sense for him to do that with Joseph practicing polygamy, that he might want to have a journal on the side. By the way, let me ask you that question directly, Dan. Why is it that William Clayton made a gap journal?
Well, so there are there's a couple of references to where he first learns about polygamy from Brigham Young. Joseph Smith instructs him to tell Clayton about polygamy.
Joseph Smith tells Brigham Young to tell William Clayton about polygamy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Brigham Young tells him. And then a conversation between Clayton and Joseph Smith is that he knew that there was someone, Sarah Crooks, back in England when he was a missionary, that he was fond of. And Joseph Smith more or less said, well, now you can send for her and perhaps marry her polygamously, and I'll help pay for it. That was a conversation. And then when it got up to, Clayton didn't quite wait. When it got up to, he wants to marry his sister-in-law.
This is not the woman in England.
No. He goes ahead before the lady, the woman in England could even get to America. And he marries.
So this is his wife's sister?
Yeah.
Right. You said they were sisters, the Moon sisters.
Yeah.
Okay.
From, England also. So he marries his sister-in-law, and right the next day, the 28th, he writes an entry, but we don't know what that looks like because we don't have that transcribed by anybody. But then after that is where the first journal cuts off, and he switches and he repeats that he was married by Joseph Smith to Margaret, and then he carries on. And this is where Joseph Smith, now that Clayton is a polygamist, Joseph Smith opens up, and they talk to each other because they are traveling around a lot together because they are in charge of properties. So they're going out to properties, surveying properties, selling properties, showing properties to prospective buyers, and they're out there together a lot of time together. And Joseph Smith meets up with some of his plural wives at Clayton's house.
Ah.
So
Clayton's pad. That's what they called it. Clayton's pad.
Yeah.
By the way, it does occur to me that I might be making a mistake by thinking automatically that this was William Clayton's idea to have a gap journal.
Yes. So it makes sense that he would want to sequester this sensitive information.
Or that Joseph Smith would want him to.
Well, I don't know about that. All
That's
I know
the question
is that
I was raising.
I don't know. There's nothing to say.
Right. So it might not necessarily have been William Clayton's idea.
Right. So we know that Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Wilford Woodruff, they're polygamists, but they don't write nearly as openly in their journals. Even they're all secretive. They don't want to let any information out. So, but Clayton is the one that writes openly, and he might have been more open because he had this gap journal. So, like I said, when this gets filled up after Joseph Smith's death, he reverts back because he's not going to waste any paper in this other journal. He's going to use it until that gets filled up.
Dan, so their argument is that not only this gap journal, but all of the journals of William Clayton were made up or created after Joseph Smith's death.
They admit that he had other journals, what I call a day book, where he would write notes down, like Wilford Woodruff. We'll talk about that a little later.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, or sometimes he would get behind, Wilford Woodruff I'm talking about, he would get behind a week even because he was sick. And then he would come back and use his notes or whatever, or even his memory, and fill in his journal up and get it up to date.
And I am correct that they're saying that all of these journals, all three journals, were written after Joseph Smith's death as dummies.
Yes.
As if they had been written when they
to add polygamy into the account in order to create evidence that they would never use.
Oh, that's important too. However, I just want to say this because I want to revisit what you said, your first point here before you go through your other three. Why make a gap volume? If you are recreating this, okay, after Joseph Smith's death, why wouldn't you just write straight through?
Exactly.
Why would you create a gap volume? That is insane.
You're trying to create evidence. You just make it look as normal as possible.
Yeah. Why would you have a gap volume? You wouldn't.
You wouldn't. There's no reason for it. And Jeremy doesn't have a reason. He never gives a reason. He just brings it up as, isn't that weird? There's something fishy going on here. It just implies that has something to do with being dishonest and trying to create a fake record.
It's like they can't allow themselves to think of the possibility that maybe Joseph Smith or William Clayton decided to make a separate side journal because Joseph was going to get up close and personal with him about all the details of polygamy and all the stuff that's going on.
Well,
and that William Clayton wants to write a personal journal about his own life and how badly polygamy is
going to be
up for him.
Embarrassing stuff that he might not want the other historians to see.
Right. And once again, now I think you have this as another bullet point, right? If the polygamy deniers are correct, and this was written after the fact, in order to say Joseph practiced polygamy, why would you have all this crap in there about how problematic polygamy was for William Clayton?
Right.
You would present it in its most glowing form.
Right. Why would you write Emma wants to divorce Joseph Smith? Why would you do that? Unless they would say they hate Emma, and they're making her look bad because she was fighting it and denying it. So they're trying to smear her. But still, the personal stuff with himself, and it's embarrassing. I mean, he went to Joseph Smith and asked to be released. To the other polygamists, this would make him look like he was weak in the faith. So he knows it's going to be stuff he doesn't want to hand over, probably. And the other questions I have in this list is why write in code? Like you'll see J, M, me, and Margaret. Why wouldn't he just write married?
Right.
Joseph married.
In other words, if you're writing Margaret, this in order to insert plural marriage into the church history, why don't you do it in a way that a person could read it and understand it? Why are you using code?
Right.
Because you're using code, it makes it sound like you don't want people to understand, the outsider understand what it is you're writing, which would defeat the whole purpose of writing it back into the history, as the polygamy deniers assert.
Yes.
They're gonna have to come up with an explanation for this gap journal. And to the audience, just again, I know you guys have said it. I'm just trying to make sure that they walk away being really clear. William Clayton writes in his journal. He suddenly stops. He suddenly grabs a different journal records things in there that tend to be maybe a little more intimate. I mean, intimate in terms of being for him and for Joseph. And then he comes back and he ends up writing back in the first journal. They're going to have to address it because, as you guys point out, if they go west to Utah and there's this decision post Joseph Smith's martyrdom to make all this fake material, even if I'm going to go ahead and give them their solution, but it's ridiculous. Even if like they go, hey, where's that journal we were writing in? And everybody goes, oh, I don't know. Let's look around. Is it underneath here? No, it's not under there. Is it, oh, it's not over there. It's not underneath this. We can't find it. Well, what the hell? Let's go ahead and write the stuff in another journal and we'll come back to it if we find it. It's kind of like the lost 116 pages. No, you want no one to have any eyebrows raised about this. You're going to sit on it and you're going to wait until you find the other book that somehow just got misplaced.
Bill, why are they recreating William Clayton's journal in the first place? All they need to do is rewrite the church history and burn the journals.
Yeah. By the way, that's
Am I right, Dan?
Yeah, the church.
Why are they recreating all of these diaries when all they're trying to do is rewrite church history?
Well, they're responding to it because we're using it as evidence. And so they want to take away our evidence.
The fact that there's a gap journal indicates to anyone paying attention that both are contemporary items to Joseph Smith. The explanation, any other explanation, requires you to use circular reasoning, mental gymnastics, create lots of conjecture and allowances to get through that. But there's no good rational reason for creating a secondary journal that fills in a middle space when the other journal covers the first beginning and then the end, but this covers the middle. Unless these are contemporary and there's an active decision at the time to keep some things out of the first journal.
It is a
and
knockout.
that's the point.
Punch.
That's the point. If it's contemporary, you can understand why he wants to keep it in a place so that he can control the information. If it's written in Utah and he wants this to be used as evidence, there's no reason to have a gap journal to control the information because you want everybody to know it.
Right. Chuck says gap journal really is the death knell. Now here's something that Rob Fotheringham says in this next video clip. And I want you to hear him say this, and I especially want you to hear Michelle Stone's response to it because she gets very excited about it. What he's going to say is every single one of the polygamy references regarding Joseph and Emma, these happen to be in the Gap book. Not technically true. With one teeny minor exception, but it's recorded in both books. And I think he's talking about William Clayton's marriage, right, to Margaret Moon?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He says it's the marriage to Margaret Moon. He starts the Gap book with his marriage to Margaret Moon. Now, listen to this. This is it's an exciting day for Michelle Stone. I almost said Sharon Stone.
Gap in the first journal.
James Allen did not mention that every single one of the polygamy references regarding Joseph and Emma, those happen to be in the Gap book.
Huh? What?
Every single reference. So why is it that Clayton would create a second book? Why is it that he would stop in the middle of the first one and leave a 17-month gap before the very next entry, and that every single the gap book that he records in the second book contains all of the salacious material? Why would someone do that? Let's answer the question. Why would Clayton do that? Well, I think that's the idea that should be explored. That's the thing that James Allen should have been talking about and should have frankly let us all know in his warning, because he knows that. Okay. So you tell me why Clayton, Little Willie, is recording these things there. So this Gap book elicits some extremely important questions. Why in the first place would he leave the Gap? You know, what possible motivation? What
I think we already answered that, didn't we? But he
That's
doesn't
so-
seem
yeah.
to have any answers.
He doesn't have
None
the
of
answer
the
because
he
it,
comes up with line up with his theory. So
it
he's
does
not
not
going to
fit.
mention any
It,
other
does,
answer.
it hurts his theory. It doesn't help it.
The moment you start with the conclusion that Joseph Smith polygamy originated with him, then the question of why would the most salacious stuff be in a Gap journal makes perfect sense. And again, if the Saints go west and Brigham Young is going to make all of this up, he's like, all right, look, get a journal out. I want you to make it look like we did all this then, but we're actually writing it down now, and we're going to change all the facts. You'd keep it all in the same book. You would not have your most salacious stuff be in another book. You'd have it be in the book. That's the whole point.
Right. You would just keep going with volume
just can't
1. You
believe-
would not have a gap.
Can I just say how ridiculous it is that they're not saying that one letter or even one revelation was forged, but all the diaries were forged and rewritten? This is ridiculous on its face. Okay, just saying. Nothing personal. So let's go to the next one. And we already played this one, right? This is the one that we just played. Let me see here. Is it this other one? Yeah, here it is. Thank you.
Give me a second here. Let's see.
Yeah, this is what I had written. The Gap Journal actually recorded contemporaneously. I think we've already beaten this horse to the point that everybody understands. Gap Journal. This is a death knell to the polygamy deniers, at least as much, if not more so, I would say, than the Nauvoo Expositor affidavits. You've got a 1-2 here that'll knock out any polygamy denier in a fair fight. So, but we're going to give you a third one. We're going to give you a third one. And I'm not going to read this again, but I'll read this part, okay? Because the Gap Journal actually recorded contemporaneously. The existence of the Gap Journal proves it's contemporaneous. Because if the Gap Journal alone was a later creation, why does the original Clayton Journal 1 have a 17-month gap in it? The very existence of the 17-month gap in Clayton Journal 1 shows the Gap Journal itself was contemporary. 2, if both the Gap Journal and the Clayton Journal are later creations, which I'm understanding is what they argue, right, Dan? They argue it's all been rewritten.
All rewritten. Because
Why create
they're
the gap?
neat.
Why create the gap in Clayton Journal 1 instead of just writing it through from beginning to end without the gap? That makes absolutely no sense either. These are the kind of insoluble problems polygamy deniers run into when trying to deal with this issue. Now, there's a few other entries here. Dan, can we just go to the Kinderhook?
Well, this is to show the marriage. The marriage entry about the marriage is in both journals. It's at the end of the one and near the beginning of the other. So let me read the first one. At Temple a.m. in the morning. Went to President Smith's, in other words, who rode with me to Brother Heber C. Kimball's, where Sister Margaret Moon was sealed up by the priesthood by the president, and married me. Evening, told mother-in-law concerning the priesthood. So he's using a euphemism, priesthood. Is it? You go, told mother-in-law concerning the polygamy. You know, so why use these euphemisms? Why use M instead of married? You know, and then
you would want everyone.
And this is in the first journal, by the way.
Dan, you would want everyone to be crystal. Again, if you're faking it, you want people to take away the meaning that you're intending. You would want to be clear. The only reason you obscure things is because you're trying to obscure things because it's happening at the time, and you want people, if they did get this book, to not be able to make heads or tails of what's going on. And and then so then you need the Brighamites, that leadership. You need them to go, yeah, but that's what it's almost like the Princess Bride, where that one guy's, well, and you would think the poison's in front of you, so I'll put the poison, and then you're switching the poison 17 times because you're trying to outthink the person who might be a step ahead of you. It becomes ridiculous.
Yeah, and so the other one is a repetition of the same information.
So this one from Journal
Journal
1 is the
2.
last entry before the gap, right?
Yeah.
In Journal 1.
Well,
and
second to
Journal
the
2,
last.
the gap journal, this is how it starts out.
Yeah, well, it starts out on the 25th. And then
So a little bit before it.
24th. And then a little bit, he backs up and then goes forward again. So, yeah.
What does he say there?
Tim, Pittman shorthand.
Yeah, at the Temple AM.
I haven't seen any in any of the photographs.
So what it says in Journal 2 about the same incident, right, in the Gap Journal? Were you going to read that, Dan?
Well, it just says the same thing. That Brother Kimball's was married to Margaret Moon.
M to M.
It's
Yeah.
this entry that he decides this is the entry that gets moved over to the other one.
Yeah.
He leaves it in the old one. But again, I can't speak for him, but he sort of senses that
Mhm.
he's going to be talking and delving into and spending time with things like this,
Mhm.
that it needs to go somewhere else. It needs to not be in the standard journal.
Yeah. And who is it in Utah
most
when they're recreating this journal, right, is writing this balderdash? That Brother Kimball's was M to M. Yeah, that's really going to help write polygamy back into the journals, isn't it?
Right.
Okay. So mention of polygamy in volume 1.
So that the point there is that Jeremy's statement that it's all the salacious stuff, all the polygamy. So he says dealing with Joseph and Emma, but in other places, I think we'll get to one where he just says, "Oh, why is all the polygamy in this one?" Well, it's not. He's warming up to it, like he's learning about some instructions on the priesthood. Brigham Young gave me some instructions on the priesthood. So that's kind of euphemistic. And then at President Joseph's office, walked out in the PM.
Whoa.
He told
So
me,
Brigham said the prophet had told him to do so and give me a favor which I have long desired.
yes, this is about that Sarah Crooks.
I was guessing it had something to do with that.
Yeah. He's thought about it and talked about it before, and they sense that he would be open to the subject.
So that was March 7th. Then on March 9th.
On March 9th is where Joseph says, "It's lawful for me to send for Sarah," and said he would furnish me the money.
Okay. And William Clayton's married at the time.
Yeah.
Got it. So April
To Ruth.
22nd, 18. Well, to two people, I guess.
No.
Or no, not quite yet. Not
Mm.
quite yet. Margaret
Yeah.
Moon's coming up fast. but
He's
not
just
quite yet.
being introduced.
Yes,
He's
April 22nd.
to the
1840.
subject of polygamy, that because it's talked about, people talk about polygamy in Nauvoo all over the place because of Bennett. But and then the April 22nd in the evening, converse with Margaret, his
White
perspective.
sister
Yeah.
on the
Moon
priesthood.
on the priesthood.
We're just having a little discussion with
Yeah.
this lady about the priesthood.
Right. And so you can see it where it's warming up to it, and then it gets to that one marriage passage. Then he's
Yes.
going, "Oh, this is going to be a theme that's going to be a lot talked about because it's part of his life now."
I got Margaret now, and I got Sarah on the way.
Right.
for a new
Sarah
journal.
turned him down when she got to Nauvoo. She turned him down and
I would
married
definitely
somebody
put
else.
that in another journal. I wouldn't write that down at all.
Okay,
Now, have
so
we already
why
covered
the
the-
Gap book?
Yeah.
Hoop has no answer, but implies that its existence is sinister.
Mhm.
Creating a false polygamy narrative doesn't require a Gap book, which explains Hoop's difficulty in explaining it.
Yeah.
Creating a Gap journal suggests a need to manage or limit sensitive information, which contradicts Hoop's theory because you want it out in the open. Motivation for creating a Gap journal would be that polygamy was illegal, secretly practiced, and messy.
Mhm.
Clayton's entering into the practice of polygamy allowed Joseph Smith to be more open with him about the practice of it, which he recorded in the Gap Journal.
So it sounds like you've answered Jeremy Hoop's question about why did he have this gap journal.
Yeah.
In fact, you've given 5 answers to that question.
Don't you guys think it's strange that they can't even consider the most rational reason? Their brain is so programmed to figure out what it means in another direction that they can't even, like, that conversation should have been, even if they still land on Joseph Smith doesn't originate polygamy with, doesn't originate with him, they still should have had time in that conversation to go, that actually seems like evidence that Joseph Smith is a polygamist, that's where the polygamy originated. And the Gap Journal's best explained if it is contemporary to Joseph Smith. So how do we work around that? And it's not. They're just stunned and they can't figure out what it means, but they know it means something, but their brain doesn't even tell them it means the thing it should mean.
From their perspective, the stronger the evidence, the more it has to be mocked. And the more they're mocking something, you can tell it's really good evidence against their position.
Yeah.
So why are Clayton's journals so neatly written? This is number 7. We got this one and one more. Hang in there, everybody. I know we're at 1 hour and 45 minutes, but we've got Dan the Man here from Ohio.
Yeah, I'm up. It's 10:10 right now.
So as I'm understanding it, this is an argument then about William Clayton's journals. They are very neatly written. And what's the argument that the polygamy deniers make, Dan?
Well, that's proof that it was rewritten, because no journal, which they're describing a diary, no diary is neat. It's like different inks and messy and crossouts maybe and things like that. And why is it so neat? That proves that it was rewritten. And there you are. Are the Clayton journals too neat to be contemporary?
And here's where he actually makes this argument.
Okay.
Because, by the way, can I just say something before we get to that? I have a slide, and it occurred to me. Wouldn't it be equally as difficult to make a journal be clean and neat the way that William Clayton has done? Wouldn't it be equally as difficult to do that, whether you're doing it contemporaneously or after the fact, drawing from other sources?
What's the question?
Writing something neatly takes as much time, whether on the front end or the back.
Yeah.
Also, if you're going to create a fake thing, you wouldn't want it to be too pretty, too neat. You would want it to be something believable. If Hoffman were doing this, he would try to copy the handwriting of whatever it was that would be seen as acceptable to be viewed as authentic.
Yeah, I don't think any of the people we're talking about have the intellect of Hoffman, but I don't know. So let's go ahead and let's look at what Rob Fotheringham says. And once again, I want to say, I think it's true that writing something out contemporaneously from whatever sources you're going from, okay, and having it clean would be just as difficult as doing it 5 years later from the sources and putting in stuff that never happened. I would suggest it would be even more difficult to make a clean journal later under those circumstances where you're writing stuff in that never happened.
Well, to me, it just shows that they aren't familiar with holographic sources. That and the journal, early Mormon journal writing. Some people are messy, but there's a lot of early Mormons that wrote their journals neatly. That was their goal, was to make a nice, polished copy. And I'll talk about Wilford Woodruff in a minute, but Wilford Woodruff's journals are like artwork almost in some places. And he started out writing cursive, but he eventually evolved into a printing style. And he would use all sorts of different styles of print to make it look all neat and fancy. And he did it as he went. He kept a day book in his pocket that he would write on. And you could see it's all sometimes it's messy. Some of the day books look just like a regular journal. It looks really neat, except it has all sorts of other stuff on it, on the page, squiggles and stuff that he didn't care about. Anyway, we just carry on here.
Yeah, here's Fotheringham making the argument. And
You
I
mean-
wanted
you mean
clips for all
Jeremy
of these,
Hoop.
and I actually went to a lot of work to get these clips together.
We're talking about
Because-
Jeremy Hoop. Or
Jeremy Hoop. Oba! Because it's quite likely that if we just tell you the arguments they're making, you would look at us and say, you must be lying, because nobody
Yeah.
would make that ridiculous an argument.
Right. Well, we're misrepresenting them.
Yes. So that's why I got all
The
these
straw
clips, so
man.
you can see yourself that they are making these arguments.
They
And
make
this is
their
the
own
one
straw
about the
man.
neat handwriting. Therefore, it must be a fake.
Yeah.
I think before we play it, I think it does bear being said again. But you and I talked a couple nights ago on Mormonism After Dark about what intelligence is. You know, you and I have said this on the phone before, that
Mhm.
that intelligence is the ability to see patterns that other people can't see. You find connections that other people can't see, and it's IQ tests are designed to put problems in front of you and see whose brain can figure out where something goes when other people can't figure out what's going on there.
Or which
And
one does not belong.
Right. And so it takes a certain amount of intelligence to see patterns that other people don't see. It takes sometimes people who are even a little more smart. We were saying this on the phone to each other. Sometimes people a little more smart, a little more intelligent, will see patterns that aren't there. Or they'll
Like chiasmus.
they'll see patterns that that are there but don't mean anything. And then
Right. And all of us, pretty much regardless of our intelligence, I think pretty much all of us can look up in the clouds and we see
Yeah.
patterns and faces.
yeah.
It's a human thing is to make
Yeah.
patterns. We're
we-
pattern making machines.
Yes, we were designed that way because 100,000
Yeah.
years ago, if there were eyes in the trees, we had to be able to see the eyes and make meaning of it so that we could get the hell out of the way of the predator, because we're now the prey. And so we had to be able to think through those things. Folks who have really high intelligence, again, I'm not knocking the intelligence of folks who are involved in the polygamy denier bit. Sometimes you can be so smart that you see patterns that are either there but don't mean what you think they do. Instance, finding anomalies, right? These guys are, I told RFM on the phone today, these guys are great at research. They're great at going and scouring all the sources and finding things that stick out. But then they don't have the ability to make the right kind of meaning from them. And you can be so smart too, where you can go, I can see the patterns over here and I can see the patterns over there, and I can tell those ones don't mean something and those ones do. And those are the kind of folks you want to surround yourself with, the ones that can actually pick out patterns that mean something and notice the patterns that others notice, but can go, those patterns aren't meant to mean this thing. So when you, for instance, Dan, walk people through the context of this history, you're helping them understand that, yeah, you're right. There was an anomaly there. It just didn't mean what you thought it did because you didn't know the
Right.
historical context of the issue. And so, again, I'm not knocking their intelligence, but there is something about their brain that they are, and you said this before, RFM, that it's a religious position. It's not an intellectual one. They are
No, it's not a historical one,
Yeah.
is what I said.
Yes, it's not a historical position. It's a religious position. And you can tell by the way they do their arguments, it is crystal clear that they need Joseph Smith to not be a polygamist.
Mhm.
And like Carrie Molstein, all evidence must be fit into that paradigm.
Yes. So here is Rob, what is it? Jeremy Hoop?
No, Jeremy Hoop. Yep.
Yeah, making this argument about neatness.
It's not contemporaneous.
Under the title, Proving William Clayton's Journals Are Not Contemporaneous, Polygamy Deniers Michelle Stone and Jeremy Hoop confidently declare they have proven William Clayton's 3 Nauvoo journals are forgeries and that they have been rewritten to include references to Joseph Smith's polygamy. They argue that the handwriting is too neat to have been a daily journal or diary.
Absolutely.
This is
So
huge.
as we're scrolling through these, just take a look at each page from 27, 28, 29, the pages in the 40s, pages in the 50s. These are throughout the journal, scattered throughout. Okay, the Joseph Smith Papers has given us sections from various parts of the journal. But we can see it's consistent. This is all book 1. Okay. And every single page is like this. Every page is clean and pristine, just like the Council of 50 record. Now, these pages here, this is from book 2. Okay, this is what I like to call the gap book. Okay, and we'll come back to that gap book and how important that is. But again, you see exactly the same thing. Page 13, 14, 15, page 16 and 18. He's using the same pen for large sections of this, which means he's sitting at a desk and he's taking other documents and he's compiling them into a single record. This is Journal 3. This is the loose little papers that were in Volume 1. We have all 14 of these. Now, the papers are distressed and colored because of weathering, because it doesn't have a cover, but you'll notice it's exactly the same. This is the narrative about Joseph's last, the 9 days previous to Carthage. Okay, it's an official, it's like an official record, you know, of the events. So these 57 random pages that we looked at from all 3 volumes, they span the length of the entire work, and they provide a fair representation of the nature of the entire record. Remember, Clayton's Nauvoo journals are the same size as the Council of 50 and Richard's memo books. And every single page, like the Council of 50 record, is written neatly and appears to be a clean, fair copy. On the top, you see the Council of 50. On the bottom, you see pages from his journals.
So Jeremy Hoop is saying that after Joseph Smith's death, William Clayton sits down at his desk and has multiple sources available. And then he transcribes his journal. He rewrites his journal to rewrite polygamy into it.
Yeah.
And it's a clean copy, and that's easier to explain than it being a clean copy if he wrote it contemporaneously.
Well, a little bit later, he'll admit that there's 3 ways to explain it at various times and try to argue for later rather than contemporaneously.
Dan, something he said here is that about the Council of 50 Minutes. Is he saying that the Council of 50 Minutes, that William Clayton wrote those over again after Joseph Smith was dead?
Okay, and the reason for that was Joseph Smith told him to bury them, and they got damaged, and so he recopied them into nice, neat 3 volumes. Has nothing to do with faking the record or anything.
But we do know that William Clayton recopied the Council of 50 record.
Yeah, he talks about it.
Oh, he talks about it. That's how we know.
So he buried them, and they got damaged because they were in the ground, underground, or some sort of thing happened to where they got probably water damaged.
I don't know why they would bury them. It's only evidence of treason.
Well, that's why. It was sensitive information, and that he was following Joseph Smith's instructions. I think Joseph Smith wanted them destroyed, and they buried them instead, and then had to recopy them because Jeremy argues that Brigham Young was upset that he didn't destroy him. But so here we have Woodruff. Oh, and on the covers, okay, he says they're the same size as these records. Well, there are standard sizes. You know, you take a full cap page and you fold it once, and that's a certain thing, and you fold it twice, and that's another certain size. And then you bind it and you cut the edges, and that makes a book, you know, of various quarto, octavo, whatever size, octavo size. Then, so the size being similar to the other ones is not significant, and the covers are different. One of his journals has a white cover, other one has a brown calf cover, and the Kingdom of God records are red, I believe, leather. So they're not the same, but the Joseph Smith Papers people say that the Gap Journal and the Gap, I think it's what the Gap Journal they're talking about, is the same size as what another Burgess, James Burgess, got in while he was in England, and that they believe that Clayton brought these empty blank journals back from England with him, and he had several of them, and he used them as he needed them. So here we have Wilford Woodruff's journals, both neat and contemporary. So you can see here's on the left is the early journal, about 1835-ish, that he used cursive there, but then he switches to printing in the center one. And he uses fancy lettering sometimes. And over at the end is towards the end of one of his journals where he actually draws a border. And
Well, this could only be a later copy that was written in order to, for some
No.
sinister reason.
no, so what? So he has day books that he uses, smaller books that he carries around and writes in. And then, like I said before, in the evening, generally, he would convert that to his polished journal, expanding it, because these are the only notes that he's keeping. And
Right.
sometimes it's completely like a journal.
So what you're
And he-
saying, Dan, is this is a faked document as well.
No,
Right.
Because this is really neat in places.
Yeah.
This would be evidence of something. This is an anomaly. Something
forgery.
strange. Something strange is happening here. I think we would have to see this as a forgery.
Only forgers write neatly.
Only.
and so Hoffman did that. Too neat sometimes, I think.
It's too neat. Wilford Woodruff is too neat. Ray
But
Yep.
so the Woodruff in this journal talks about writing his journal, writing up his journal at the end of the day. Sometimes he writes, or catching up. I'm almost caught up. He gets caught up.
I've
You
been
know,
there.
Yeah.
Been there, Wilford. We all have.
So, no, these are contemporary journals. Nothing tricky about them, and they're neat.
So if someone brings up the argument about how neat William Clayton's journals are and therefore fake, you can bring up Wilford Woodruff and say, checkmate.
Yeah, there you are. Look at that. That's contemporary.
Did Wilford Woodruff have any Gap journals?
Well, this is my question from the
Not
back
that I
row,
know
which
of.
I've already talked about a couple of times. It's just, why would it be any more difficult to write it neatly if it was contemporaneous than write it neatly years later? It
So
seems like
these
it's
are
between
Wilford
different
Woodruff's
people.
day books.
Yeah, and here's the day books. This is for
Sometimes
jotting
it's
down
one
notes
word.
and things
So
of what
did have
happens during the
separate
day.
books. So he
Yeah,
had
so
people
you see
day and
these one of them's even like a U.S. postage or what a postal. It's a little, or a bank book. He used to even use bank books, little tiny books that he would keep notes in and then transfer them to his journal later. Sometimes they were a little bit better, and sometimes it had no cover at all. This one over here on the right had no cover at all. You can see he just started writing.
Yeah.
Did they buy those bank books thinking that Kirtland thing was going to last a little longer?
This
Just a bunch
is
of
in
extra
the,
bank
this
books.
is in the Utah period.
I'm just joking.
So maybe not.
So
But
here's a
the
sample
interior.
of some random pages.
Yeah, and this
So
is all kind of scribbly. Actually, it's neater than I could do.
But
in a
look,
finished draft.
yeah, I can never write this neat. At the top, this is the day book. This is not his journal. You can see he's writing a little bit, a paragraph, or 4 days, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th,
Mhm.
and it's all neat. There's no crossouts, interlinear additions, or anything. And then he uses the blank spot as a scratch paper. He does mathematical calculations or
Oh.
practicing writing some sort of name or something.
But as neat as this is, these are just the raw material
Yeah.
for his journal.
Right. And so as there's the one on the far right is you can see at the bottom, he's just writing, separating stuff. It's
That looks like a different person's handwriting, Dan. Fake.
so these three. So Jeremy gets up to this 3 possible ways to explain the neatness of Clayton's journals. So he admits that they could be contemporary. He wrote this clean copy from his journal on the very same day or shortly thereafter. But if so, how do we account for the Gap book? Yeah, Jeremy, how do we?
We're going to
I
play
don't-
that clip here in a second, too.
So this is weird to me that previously he's arguing that he doesn't have an explanation. Now he's using it as evidence that it is not contemporary.
Yes. Right.
So, but he doesn't know how to explain it.
Because you can't explain it and have it support his argument.
So the second choice is he wrote it sometime after, but it's a true copy, no additions, just he wrote it after for some reason, an exact copy of the original. But if so, then did he also keep a gap journal or gap book? Like there'd be two, there'd be a rough gap, which would, and then when he copied it, he would keep the gap. Doesn't make any sense either way.
Yeah, I
And
think
the
we're all
last
agreed that's
one
not
is
what
his
happened.
favorite one, which is
Yes.
he wrote it after Joseph Smith's death and used it to create a narrative to support the new order of things, which is polygamy.
But notice what he doesn't say after that. He doesn't say, but if so, how do we account for that gap book? That's where it goes.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so those are his
So
possibilities.
there are the three, and so his favorite one is the last one, of course.
Yes, and that's why he doesn't have, but if so, after it.
How do we explain the gap book? We're waiting.
We're waiting. So he has three to the neatness. There's also some explanations he gives for the neatness
Yeah,
of
he
Clayton's
says
journals.
if he's not using these as evidence, but he's saying if it were written later with the new order of things, it would
Oh.
explain
Ah,
Clayton's pattern of creating records, which by that he means when Clayton copied the Masonic record. There's two records for the Masonic Lodge of Nauvoo. And when he copied it, he didn't just copy it, it kind of made it neater and amplified it a little bit, filled out the language. Just like that one Joseph Smith journal, like it's too sparse. The reader can't tell what it is, and so the scribe it amplifies it and makes it fuller. Well, that's what he means. That he has a habit. This is his habit, his pattern of creating records, is that he feels free to expand. Well, it wasn't just Clayton; it was everybody did it back then. Everybody took these sparse note kind of. If you take the minutes, like in the history of the church, you take the minutes of a meeting. You can't just publish it like that. Everybody's not going to understand what it is. Well, if you're doing the Joseph Smith papers, you keep it just exactly. You try to recreate it like, a picture of it almost.
Yeah.
Well, back then they felt free to smooth it out and not think that they're doing something underhanded or they're just making a good
right.
history. They don't have the same standards as we have or
They didn't say
expectations.
M to MM.
Yeah, where we put in brackets. They
Right.
they feel free to just write married without putting it in brackets or something. So they had a different standard. They would fill out the record. That's what Clayton was doing. But he wasn't it wasn't Clayton's pattern. It was the practice at the time. Everybody did it. Okay. And they weren't trying to be tricky. You could probably go to the records in similar situations of other churches or other institutions writing their histories would do the same thing with the minutes. They wouldn't publish the minutes. Just
Dan,
as
would you be
they
okay if we skip the next three and went to number 8? Because we're over 2 hours now.
Okay.
I think these are going to lead us off into rabbit trails that are just going to kind of confuse
Yeah.
what it is we're trying to do.
Okay, you can skip that. We could get right to the
Number
thing.
8.
Here is Clayton's journal, and he took the Kinderhook plates, which are those bell-shaped plates with weird characters on them, which was a hoax. About 30 miles south of Nauvoo in Kinderhook, Illinois, these men decided to try to pretend like they found these plates, 6 plates, in a mound, an Indian burial mound, supposedly. And they would take them to Joseph Smith in Nauvoo and see if he would translate them. He did in a general way, according to Clayton's journal, and that it was a history of the person who was buried with it, the bones that they found, and basically he was a Jaredite. So Clayton decided, oh, I'll take one of these, and they were only like 3 inches high. You'll see in another picture soon. And he put it on his journal and traced it contemporaneously. Because they were only at Joseph Smith's house for a week.
For a week. He only has them for a week in 1843.
Then they took them away. So I'm not the one that invented this evidence. Other people have talked about it.
Yeah, but William Clayton could not have given us a better evidence for the contemporaneous nature of the Gap Journal. This is Journal 2. This is the Gap Journal.
Yeah. So
this is where he writes it. This is where we get it from about what Joseph Smith said was on that Kinderhook plates, right?
He writes right next to it. This diagram shows the size of the plates being drawn on the edges, right? Meaning he's tracing it. So
he put it down. He writes on the left-hand side. He puts the plate on the page.
Yes.
He traces the outside of the plate. He then fills in the rest of the page with writing, except for where the plate would be. And both before and after, before and after, before and after. Obviously, the tracing was done before the writing. And then it goes on, it fills out the rest of the page. And Joseph Smith only had those plates, the Kinderhook plates, for 1 week. Was it May of 1843?
Well, Clayton's writing this on May 1st.
May 1st of 1843, correct?
Yes. Oh, that's pretty cool. That's a replica, obviously.
That is the smoking gun when it comes to the contemporary status of the Gap Journal, in which is all the intimate stuff about plural marriage.
That's pretty cool. Where'd you get that, Bill?
We did an episode on the Kinderhook plates, and I can't remember what the gentleman's name was, but he did a YouTube video talking about these. I don't know if he recreated them or what. I'll just know. Well, you guys can say more, and we can go to the video here in a moment. But if it can be demonstrated that by far the most rational view is that an actual Kinderhook plate was laid on that journal, that Gap Journal, by the way.
Yes.
And copied. By the way, if the Gap Journal's real, the very next step is that the other journal is real too, because it has the gap in it.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. This fills in the gap. It's like a puzzle piece, and you just found the 2 puzzle pieces that fit together. And if the Kinderhook plate's only available for a week, and that plate is laid on that paper and copied out, it proves that the Gap Journal was written contemporary to Joseph Smith. And it also shows that years later, if Brigham Young is having people fake the other journal, it makes no sense, especially since the scandalous stuff, the salacious stuff, according to them,
the polygamy stuff
is in the Gap Journal.
The stuff that proves Joseph Smith did practice polygamy, guys. Just saying. Okay, so let me
keep
put
going.
this up here. And so now we've got a clip. I think it's the next thing, the video. No, it isn't quite yet.
So there's a
Because we have
Kinderhook
3
plate, shows you the
explanations, right, Dan?
size. And Joseph Smith published them in the Times and Seasons, and also the Nauvoo Neighbor, and other places, actually. So those are the 6 sides, showing both sides were written on.
So 6 plates
and
and
Headlock.
the
Reuben
both sides.
Reuben
replicated.
Headlock made these woodcuts called woodcuts. Jeremy will try to get out of this.
Yes, he will. Now, this picture on the right Is that the one remaining
Yes.
plate?
In
That's
the
that's one of the
Chicago-
plates.
Chicago Historical Society, I believe.
And is it true there's only one that remains and that's it?
Yeah, as far as I know.
Okay. So now we've got, he'll say, well, since Joseph Smith, from their point of view, has to be, since William Clayton has to be writing this after the fact, this
Yeah.
gap journal after the fact, right? They've got to come up for an explanation as to how it is that that son of a bitch put one of those effing Kinderhook plates down on the page and traced it.
Yeah.
And so they're going to go to, well, he could have gotten it out of the newspaper, or, or they could have traced it, from the print, the block, right? And you take that apart in this next clip. Very well, Dan. And then he's going to go crazy and actually say, well, these plates were still in existence until the Civil War.
Civil War.
I mean, this one's still around today, but he says, so he could have gone and I guess
Found him.
yeah, dug up William Fugate and said, hey man, can I have one of those plates so I can write it on my faked journal that I'm trying to write polygamy back into church history, so I can trace it to make it look like it's actually real?
And never show, never use it.
And then never use it. Would you? Yeah. Then never use
It's only
it.
become evidence to us.
Oh my gosh. Now, the only reason I elaborate and take the time to articulate what their position has to be is to show how ridiculous it is. Which is why it is that in things like this, they won't say what their position is. They will just throw out things, right? And then they'll laugh. And actually, Michelle Stone, I think she says, oh, they call this evidence.
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah, the fact you can't
'Cause she-
identify it as evidence is somewhat telling.
Jeremy tries to explain it, and she believes Jeremy's explanation is it.
This is the death knell, okay? This is the nuclear bomb in the polygamy deniers' underpants. This is what this is. And listen to them hoot and holler over how ridiculous it is and how stupid anybody is who thinks this is evidence that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy.
Yeah, I think there's been 3 death knells tonight. So here we go. This is this one.
This is what they call proof that the journal is contemporaneous. There's a page in the journal where Clayton traces something called a Kinderhook plate. If you're not familiar with that story, go Google it. You'll figure it out.
In 1843, several men unearthed 6 bell-shaped brass plates, each about 3 inches tall, from a Native American burial mound near Kinderhook, Illinois. The plates featured symbols that resembled an ancient script. One of the men suggested that the artifacts should be taken to Nauvoo for Joseph Smith to translate. According to Clayton's so-called Gap book, President Joseph has translated a portion and says they contain the history of the person with whom they were found. And he was a descendant of Ham through the loins of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and that he received his kingdom from the ruler of heaven and earth. The plates were subsequently discovered to be a hoax. During the week they were in Joseph Smith's possession, both Clayton and Brigham Young examined them and traced their shape into their journals.
The question is, did Clayton trace this on the day, on May 1st, 1843, as it says in the journal? The antagonists, the apologists both agree that this is absolute proof that the journal's contemporaneous.
So what about that, Jeremy?
I can't prove when he wrote this. I don't know when he wrote it exactly. I have an idea of when he wrote it, but I don't know exactly when he wrote this particular page. But he could have written a long time after, because we have newspaper articles from which he could have made a sketch, or he could have cut them out and traced around them, because those newspaper articles were made from something called woodcuts.
Clayton wrote in his journal, "This diagram shows the size of the plates being drawn on the edges of one of them. Hoop's theory can't survive if Clayton traced one of the plates during the week they were in Joseph Smith's possession. So he desperately needs to explain away this evidence. According to Hoop, Clayton didn't trace one of the plates, as he stated, but somehow planted this fake evidence. Now look closely at the 2 tracings. No way Clayton and Young did that freehand. The edges are just too perfect, and I seriously doubt that a cutout of the newspaper or broadside would be adequate to produce a hard-edged shape, such as we see in the two journals. But Hoop has a third option.
We also had the woodcuts available. Apparently, the same person who made the woodcuts for the Book of Abraham and printed them in the newspaper. Those are actually they cut images out of wood and they make etchings, say, so that you can then put ink on them and put them on a page, and then you have the image. That's what you're seeing in these newspapers are made from wood cuts. They were made by a guy named Reuben Hedlock, and apparently Joseph employed him to make the wood cuts of the Book of Abraham, or also employed him to make the wood cuts of these Kinderhook plates. They got printed in the Nauvoo Neighbor, I believe it was. They got printed in the Prophet. So Clayton had access to something.
Something? Hoop seems determined to explain away this evidence any way he can. He appears to suggest that Clayton could have used the woodcuts themselves to trace around. I don't think Hoop understands Hedlock's method. The woodcuts weren't cut out of wood in the shape of a bell. They had to be square to fit tightly into the printing forms. Woodcuts could be made to use directly, but they would have to be square with low relief and impossible to trace. However, Hedlock etched the image into a block of wood, which was then used to create a mold so that the metal could be poured into the mold to create a plate. Hedlock attached the plate to a block of wood with screws, like the Book of Abraham facsimiles. Consequently, it's not possible to trace around the printing plates. Even if one were to detach facsimile 2 from the block of wood, one could not use it to draw a circle, especially with a quill. So you can mark this suggestion off the list as well. But wait, Hoop has more.
By the way, the plates were around till the Civil War, so they were available, they were around.
Okay, the idea that Clayton had access to the original plates after they left Nauvoo, or that he would go out of his way to track them down to trace one of them into his journal, is ludicrous. Right, Michelle?
That is laughably silly.
I'm glad we can agree on that.
Neither of us are proving how or when he did it, and that's not the point.
No, that's not
The point is, they cannot say
It's the
that
point.
this is proof that it was contemporaneous, because it absolutely could have been done after the fact.
right.
That's the
is
point.
That they are completely wrong in saying that proves that it was written. That is laughably silly.
So I think we can dispense with this, Jacob Verdreen, if you're watching. You can no longer claim that this is contemporaneous
And Bill
proof.
Reel. Bill Reel's not
And
watching.
Bill
Thank
Reel.
you. And all of them.
And
It's so dumb.
Now,
So it's dumb, it's silly, but we can't even claim. We
believe
can't even.
that Clayton.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Potentially,
I'm sorry. I didn't know you were continuing to speak, Dan. I apologize. I get so exercised. What I was saying is that we can't even claim this as evidence anymore. That it's authentic when it is a smoking freaking gun.
You have William Clayton and Brigham Young and all these guys. They go west. They're like, hey, we're gonna fake this. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna draw one of these Kinderhook plates on this journal. That's gonna sell this thing. Now, can't freehand that. That's not gonna work out good.
No.
Those woodcuts aren't gonna cut it. Here's what I want you to do, Clayton. I want you to go find that guy. Go see if he still got those 6 plates and bring one back, and then we can trace it exactly, and then we'll get rid of the evidence.
Right. And you can trace it in your journal, the Gap journal, the one with all the polygamy stuff in it. And I'll also trace it in my day book, Brigham Young speaking, right? Because that's his day book, isn't it? That it's traced
yeah,
in?
right.
And it's
It's
exactly
a little
the same
tiny. It's a
size.
little tiny book. You can see the plate is like little more than 2 inches wide, and it reaches both sides almost. It's a
bigger on
little
the page.
tiny book Brigham Young carried around in his pocket.
Mhm.
And Jeremy says, what kind of person just puts a bell-shaped drawing in the middle of his journal? What kind of journal is this? It has this date over before the bell shape, and after it has a different date, and there's something fishy going on. Well, this is just a day book where you saw like Woodruff's day book, he wrote his journal, but he also wrote squiggly stuff and mathematical figures in the blank spots. It was a book he carried around. It's actually kind of a memo / appointment book, because one of the things Jeremy mentions, a date isn't a date, it's an address. It's an address of a person, you know, and so there's appointments in this book that Brigham Young carries around in his pocket, an appointment book. But he also set it down and he traced it 2 days after Clayton traced his.
Mm-hmm.
So, why does Brigham Young need to fake his memo book? You know,
No,
there's
he
no
doesn't.
there's no reason.
Okay, so I just want everybody to know that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. It is unquestionable. And before you listen to Polygamy Deniers talk about the leaves of the problem, you might want to have them examine the roots. And some of those roots we've been talking about tonight. And one of them are the Nauvoo Affidavit, the Martha Brotherton Joseph and the Joseph Smith Doppelganger, and the Gap Journal. And the fact that in the Gap Journal, the existence of the Gap Journal proves that it is contemporaneous. And on top of that, in the Gap Journal itself is a tracing of the freaking Kinderhook plate, which is the exact same size, or same dimensions, I should say, as the Kinderhook plates themselves. Did you want to say something, Bill? Because you're like the man on the street here trying to see how this strikes you.
No, you explained. I was about 10 seconds into your explanation on our phone call. We talk almost every show before we do the show. And you said, hey, here's the main thing that's going to happen tonight. We're going to talk about this Gap book. And then you said like one more sentence where you explained the Kinderhook plate in the Gap book fills in a gap, 17 months. And I stopped you in your tracks and I said, that clearly articulates to me that Joseph Smith is the originator of polygamy, because the Gap book only makes sense in that narrative. The Kinderhook plate on the Gap book only makes sense in that narrative.
That's the cherry on top. That's the coup de grace to the polygamy deniers.
And I will put because we've covered this in the past, and if there's anybody that's new here tonight that has not followed along, I'm going to put in the notes or in the show comments the 3-part write-up on our polygamy episode that lays out all the evidence for polygamy outside of the things that we're talking about tonight. We do get into the Brotherton evidence. I'll just note again, writing neat, that's a problem. We gotta, that means it's faked. Having a Gap book, we don't know what that exactly means, but it definitely means it was faked. Having the Kinderhook plate traced on the Gap book, don't know exactly when that happened, but it had to have happened late. Here's some silly ways in which it could have happened. All of that added together from the other side just looks like this is really convincing beyond what anyone would think through for their master plan. This just clearly articulates that this is contemporary material to Joseph Smith, and he's the originator of polygamy. I don't know how they get around it.
Because it is a religious belief masquerading as a historical inquiry.
Yeah. So the conclusion I make on the other slide, if we're going to show those other slides.
Well, I hope so. Let's see here. Here we go. Yes, there it is. That is smoking gun, baby, isn't it?
Yeah. And then next slide. Oh, that's Brigham Young's little memo book. You can see at the bottom where you can see the binding. So it's an equal side. It's an up and down binding.
This is the same image, only flipped, right?
Yeah. So he wrote in there, May 3rd, 1843. I took this at Joseph Smith's house, found near Quincy. So Kinderhook is near Quincy.
When we fake it, make sure we write part of it upside down. That'll just make this more clear that this is real.
It's an anomaly. And if you haven't picked it up yet, anomalies mean that Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy. And if it's too clean without anomalies, that also shows that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy.
It was a really good fake. So this shows the woodcut, what the
Right.
different explanations shows the woodcut.
Yeah, if you tried to trace
You
the
couldn't-
woodcut, you'd end up with anything but a circle here. For
Well, it's a
facsimile
very
two.
low relief. It
Yeah.
has to fit in a printing form. It's not a high relief thing. And they don't cut out the circle.
Here's a good point. Imagine trying to trace the circle of the hypocephalus.
Right.
Is that right? Hypocephalus. Trying to trace the circle with that laying down on the paper.
No.
You couldn't.
No,
Mm-mm.
you got a quill pen, by the way. You're
quill.
dropping all the ink because you have to put it on its side.
Woodcuts aren't it, Jeremy. Going back and finding one of the plates is not it.
So it's possible that
Yeah.
you could take one of the, because on the broadside there, they are actual size. So you could cut it out, etch it onto a piece of metal, cut the metal out, file it down, make a fake, trace it. Okay. Or you could just do it on, so it has to be something thick so that the quill can rest against the edge and make that hard edge look. Well, you could go through all of that trouble, and that would be Clayton intentionally creating evidence that no one would ever notice for 180 years.
Wouldn't they just skip using the Kinderhook plate as a way to make the thing?
Yeah, why? You don't need it.
No, you don't
Why
need
would
it.
you need evidence?
So those the replicas.
Who in the 19th century is going to go, oh, that's evidence? No, they would look right past it like everybody did until
Right.
the authenticity of the journals were challenged.
Yes.
And then
Very
you
good.
needed evidence, and we created this evidence
Yes.
because of the situation we're in.
He goes to all this trouble to create evidence that they never used.
Right.
The whole point of this is to show that this is contemporary, to falsely show it's contemporary, right?
Right.
Going through all of this is to show that it's contemporary. But why would you go to all that trouble to write polygamy back into the William Clayton journal when you're never going to use it? Is that the
And
point?
you're in
You're never going
Utah.
to use it to prove that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy.
Yeah, you're in Utah, and people aren't going to ask you for evidence, really. They didn't.
In the newspaper are the replicas of the Kinderhook plates. Are those to size?
Yes.
Okay, so they could do what you suggested.
Yeah, you could. But that would be an intentional creation of evidence that's going to planning to put it in your journal and then never use it. Or how are you going to tell somebody, oh, that's evidence? Is Clayton going to say, oh, this is evidence?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has a plate around to check, you know?
And while they have to have a force field that knocks every one of these criticisms away as some sort of fake thing, all we need is just this one thing. If the Gap book truly has the Kinderhook plate traced on it, it all by itself proves it's a contemporary source demonstrating that Joseph Smith is where polygamy originated. Yeah.
Yes.
So anyway,
He
Hoop
said
wants
this
us
at the
to
end of
believe.
his, at the end of the clip, but can you read this too, Dan?
Yeah. Hoop wants us to believe that Clayton somehow intentionally created evidence in his Gap journal so that someone like Jacob Verdreen and Bill Reel would find it 180 years later. Why would Brigham Young need to create fake evidence for his day book? Is this theory credible, or is it transparently desperate? And I say game over.
Okay, wait a
This-
second. Okay, so the day books also have to be fabricated.
Brigham
Right?
Young.
Brigham Young's
Young-
day book, the day books have to be fabricated. They have to be written after the fact to write polygamy back into it or to write Kinderhook plates back into it. So
Yeah.
now not only are the journals themselves being fabricated after the fact, they're also fabricating day books upon which the journals themselves are based after the fact.
More than that, RFM, they have to perceive that there's a need for a day book. that would be beneficial to their theory. And they have to think that through on the backside of this, way past the time period, and go, you know what would be helpful is if we created a fictional 17-month gap and then created a gap book. And then we put the Kinderhook plate tracing in the gap book where the most salacious, you're just, guys, it's just.
Give it up. Give it up, guys. Men have gone to the chair on less than this.
It's desperate.
It's
desperate.
What makes people call you crazy is that you defend the indefensible.
I didn't say that, though. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah. But people do say that, and it's the why people say that. I'm not saying it. I'm saying people say that.
People.
Now, I'm not saying that people who call you insane are necessarily crazy, okay? But I'm not calling you insane. And that's it. That's the Silver Bullet. Stephen King's Silver Bullet. If you haven't seen the movie, go back and watch it. An early appearance from the late, great Corey Haim. And the always entertaining Gary Busey.
Gary Busey. One of my favorites. Yeah, good old Gary Busey.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
Talk about
I
crazy.
think that takes care of it.
We do have a few
Polygamy
phone
deniers
calls.
have been routed and were last seen hightailing it over the fields.
I want them to respond to this. They have to have a working theory that makes some bit of sense, and it can't just have a bunch of special pleading, right? It can't do that. It has to go like, there's good reason for this. This is the most rational way to do it. I just want to note to the audience. The audience will think this is funny. You two probably did not notice this at all. There was somebody in the chat who was.
I did notice.
I'm not calling anybody crazy tonight, except for this. There was a person.
Except for this person in the chat, and you know who you are.
Named Sneaks. It was.
Oh no, not Sneaks.
SNEA.
A lot of people think that's Jacob Hansen just sneaking around by another
I don't
name.
think so. This person was pretty obtuse, which Jacob is, but obtuse in a different way.
Yeah.
We ended up having to remove him, and he just kept recreating new YouTube profiles, and we got rid of him. I'm 6-7 times. I had to ban him from the chat.
Wow.
Well, then he tried to call, and his call message didn't make sense either. I don't have it in front of me now, but his call message was something really weird too, that it was obvious that we were going to have quite the thing. I didn't want to put that on, but we do have 3 phone calls in the call-in studio, so we
the moon was full a couple of nights ago. That might have.
So I need to say that Jeremy on Facebook said that Vogel didn't touch any of my evidence.
That's because you have none.
No, by the way,
evidence.
Yeah.
Jeez.
What? Yeah.
This is because you have to believe that Joseph Smith was virtuous and pure and sure did not practice polygamy. Otherwise, your whole religious worldview crumbles. And that is a huge motivator. I know I used to be a practicing Mormon. I get it. I understand. But hopefully what we've talked about tonight will make it clear to you that your position on this is absolutely 1,000,000% wrong.
Yeah. By the way, every other problematic issue also proves they're wrong. Book of Abraham, for example.
Oh, yeah. About Joseph Smith?
Any other issue that happens during Joseph Smith's life, that Adam Clark's commentary, all of it, treasure dig, all of it. So you don't even have to debate on polygamy to prove these folks wrong.
No, I know that's true, but they're wrong about polygamy too.
Yeah, they are. All right, so let's take the first call. This one is David, unless Sneaks is cheated and snuck back in.
David,
are you? Oh, let me make sure. There you are. Are you there?
I'm here.
All right, my friend, you're on the show, Mormonism Live. What's on your mind tonight?
Yeah, this has been fascinating, and there's lots of pieces to try to remember and put together. So I'm just kind of learning. Anyway, but it sounds like you guys make some great arguments, and the polygamy deniers seem kind of desperate. You know, their theories and their arguments just seem desperate. But my question was trying to kind of, sometimes when I try to figure things out, I try to step back and take the 30,000-foot view. And I think RFM just answered it just a few minutes before I came on. But it's like, why is it so important for the polygamy deniers to have Joseph not practicing polygamy? why is that such a big thing for them? And if what RFM just said, then it's kind of like, well, don't they paint themselves into a corner?
Yes.
In that, well, Brigham practiced polygamy and all the apostles after him. So isn't the church in apostasy? And didn't the church rise and fall with Joseph?
Yes, but if you bring it up to Michelle Stone, she'll accuse you of something horrible like she did to other people. She doesn't like to have that logical inconsistency put to her where she has to respond to it. It provokes a lot of emotion on her part because there is no answer to it. Yeah, if Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy, then President Nelson is not a prophet of God.
Now, some people who are polygamy deniers are outside the Brighamite faction. So they would go, I don't need Brigham. I don't need the Brigham Young and anybody afterward to have authority and keys. Now,
Right.
Michelle's the exception to the rule. But I'll just note, we should give credit to the polygamy deniers on this, which is to what the caller's saying. Anybody that's forming this argument seems like they started off going, inside my conscience, in my intuition, in my gut, I can tell that if Joseph Smith was a polygamist, that was gross. That was really yucky. I don't want my Joseph Smith to have done that. And so I need at all costs, because I want Mormonism to be true.
Mm-hmm.
I want Mormonism on some level to be true. And I can't have Joseph Smith doing the things that feel gross to me. And so they're trying to deal with it that way.
And that the Book of Mormon calls an abomination.
Yeah.
And
So
Michelle
give him credit
does.
for, yeah. So
Michelle
give him credit.
calls it an abomination.
Yeah, so Joseph Smith can't be doing abominations and still be a prophet. So he
It
didn't
is-
practice polygamy. Everything else follows from that.
Give them credit that their gut is better than Brian Hale's gut. Brian Hale goes, I don't care. Joseph Smith is diddling little girls. I don't care. He's sending people on missions and marrying their wives. I don't care. At least the polygamy deniers are bothered by the
Yes.
data.
Yeah. In that
Right.
sense, they're normal.
Anything else, David? Otherwise, we'll let you go.
Okay. Well, no, I think that's about it. It baffles me that like the church now, you know, we can be like do the doctrinal hokey pokey and but the one thing that stands is authority. It's like
Mm-hmm.
have the authority to change things back and forth and up and down. And it just seems like it smashes authority to pieces then.
It does. It does. There's no way out of it. But, you know, that's where they are. So it's up to Michelle. If she wants to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with polygamous President Nelson at the head, which is kind of its own kind of irony. If she wants to do that, that's up to her. Whatever, you know, makes her happy. It's just that it seems that is as logically inconsistent as the entire position about Joseph Smith and polygamy.
Antithetical, yeah. Okay, David, thank you so much for the call.
Yeah.
Take it easy.
And once again, it applies to the polygamy deniers as much as anybody else. You cannot reason somebody out of a position that they did not reason themselves into. These people did not reason themselves into this. This is why no historian believes that Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy. I'm going to say that again. No historian believes that Joseph Smith did not practice polygamy. These guys do, but they're not historians. And that should tell you a lot. There's consensus among historians on this issue. But these people are going against the historical consensus.
All right, next call is a regular of ours, Nathan, Detroit. Nathan, how are you?
Hey, Bill, RFM, Dan, how are you doing tonight?
Hi.
Good.
Hi, Nathan.
Hey, so I do have a quick question regarding woodcuts for Dan Vogel. Bill, are you able to quickly pull up the Kinderhook plates newspaper page?
Let me try.
Yeah,
Here, I bet I can.
the broadside.
Let me try.
Yeah, you are. That was
There
it.
you
Go.
go. How about that one?
Yeah.
It's up, Nathan.
Yeah, that one was good. So the my question is, as was mentioned, so Reuben Hedlock did these woodcuts and also the Book of Abraham woodcuts. Am I correct in that?
Dan,
Yes,
did you hear the question?
Did the same guy do the Book of Abraham woodcuts as this?
that's assumed, I think.
Okay.
Okay. I guess my question is just because the Book of Abraham woodcuts are done with, call it a white background with the black drawings on them, whereas these are, the black plate with the white
Yeah.
markings on them.
Mhm.
And just curious, maybe I need to consult a historical printer or something, but I'm just curious about what would have motivated the different, the inverted contrast between those two preparations.
I think it might have to do with the way that they were prepared, because it looks like from this, what happened is that the part with the print on it, in other words, the part that's uppermost, it's basically, they made another one that was like this one, right? Like the one on the right. It has a solid surface, but it has scratches in it. And if you were to put ink on that and press it on paper, right, you would end up with something that would look like this, because the scratches would be white because they wouldn't have the ink in them. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah.
I think
No, I
that's
totally
right.
agree. I guess the question then is, if I'm doing the woodcut then of, call it, facsimile 2, the hypocephalus, then the person making that woodcut would have had to essentially kind of dig around all of those features he was attempting to go on that relief.
Yeah.
And so I'm not, I guess it may have been timing. It just seems interesting as to what, I guess, I'm not questioning that he did it. I'm just, kind of what would motivate the difference between the difference in practice between the two options.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I'm going to put my screen back up here. We can just take a look. Let me get this one off, take that one up. I think that's exactly what happened. It's again, the slave shows up as black. So he's standing out. Everything else would be a recession except for the lines. So I think it's exactly what you are thinking. So the Kinderhook plate, the majority of it is just the flat part of the metal that would have stood out. That would have had the most depth to it. And then all of the symbols, hieroglyph, whatever, all the symbols that are on there would have been the impressions. Those would have been the cut throughs. And whereas with the Book of Abraham printing press, it's only the outside lines in the character things that are being left as the depth, and everything else is the impression. So it's the opposite.
Right.
Which would explain why one is more dark and light and the other one's more light.
I wouldn't know right offhand the procedure. I more or less outlined the procedure of making the facsimiles by etching into wood, then pressing plaster or clay or whatever into the holes, which creates a relief that you then push into another mold so that you could fill it with lead, and so that the relief would stand out in the direction that you need. So you would probably do a similar method. I don't see him. I see him using
so I don't
lead metal, not just wood, not a wooden thing. It would. So I don't believe. I don't believe they're all one piece,
right,
carved into wood, because in the different executions of it, there's different spaces. There's different spaces between the bell-shaped things, which tells me that each one was probably a separate item.
Okay. And again, this is simply, I guess, intellectual curiosity as to what would have been the it seems to be a difference in practice between the two, and I'm not questioning either one. Just
Well, I think
what-
they're
yeah.
I think
I
they're
think he had 12 blocks.
they're done opposite in a sense. I mean, it's the same technique, but the Kinderhook plate,
Right.
the most of the bell would have had the most depth, whereas most of the Book of Abraham print plate is carved out. And I think, you would,
Mhm.
if you looked at how you would do both projects, I think they each require it to be done that way. Because otherwise you'd have all these little symbols in the bell that are sticking out,
Oh, yes.
but you wouldn't have the shape of the bell itself. It would be cut down as well.
You wouldn't have the bell shape.
Right. So you had to do it in the reverse.
Yeah. That makes sense. This gives a better impression of the overall shape. Whereas
Here's the other one.
facsimile
It would
have
be-
push around them.
It would be easier to have those little tiny markings etched in rather than
On the
sticking
plates,
out.
the Kinderhook, yep. And it's much easier on the Book of Abraham, to have the character definitive line stand out and carve
Okay.
out the rest of it.
Can I just say, every time I look at that thing by Reuben Hedlock, whether it's facsimile 3, facsimile 1,
Yeah.
whatever it is, that's 3. And I go, I cannot even imagine the artistry, the talent to do that and to make it match so well that with facsimile 1, we can see exactly that it's right. We can compare it to what it was actually made from, because we have facsimile 1 today. And then to do it reversed, because you're not doing it, you're doing it reversed.
And then
Right?
touch it up.
Yes. So that when it prints, it'll be right.
Don't forget the beak being cut out
Yeah.
either, folks.
Or am I wrong about that? Do you do it the regular way on the wood, and then when you put the lead into it, does that reverse it? I
No,
don't
you
know.
put clay into it first,
Yeah,
and
this
you
has
make a
become
mold. So you etch it into the wood. You put the clay, press the clay, and then you use that. When that dries, use that to make another mold that's the opposite.
Yeah, it's quite possible that if you do it anyway, we don't have to have a class about, printing and all this stuff. But I think that if you do it the regular way in the wood, and then you put it the lead over it, that it'll come out as a reversed image. So maybe you don't have to do it reversed yourself.
Nathan, we'll talk to you on Friday, my friend.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Sorry for this extended diversion.
No, it's good.
I had hoped it would be a quick answer, or even an I don't know would have been fine for a short
don't
answer.
know.
But
I didn't know we could get off that easy.
your time in going with me down this path.
Hey, just to
What's
know.
that?
Oh, wait, he didn't know that'd be that easy, I think is what he said.
To say I don't know.
Yeah. I'll just note to the audience and to Nathan, because Nathan's a regular on Mormonism After Dark, we will be starting at 9 p.m. instead of 8 p.m. this Friday.
Oh my
So if you're going
gosh.
to tune in for Mormonism After Dark, it will be 9 p.m. Mountain Time. So hopefully, Nathan, we'll see you at 9 p.m. on Friday.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right,
Thank you all for your
take it
time. I really enjoyed this whole presentation.
Awesome.
Thank you, Nathan. Remember, the Biltmore Garage wants a grand. So Friday is going to be Good Friday, and we're going to be having Mormonism After Dark on Good Friday. So bring all of your Catholic stories, any stories that have to do with it, because we need to do, as the church leaders are directing, and celebrate Holy Week now, like we've been doing it for 200 years.
All right, we've got one more call. This is Tim Rathbone. So
Tim,
how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you guys doing?
Excellent.
Hey, Tim.
It's quite a scam
You
these
know what?
Brighamites pulled off, isn't it?
Oh man, let me see. We've got William Clayton in Brigham Young's diary, and the Nauvoo Temple record, and the Council of 50 Minutes.
Leonard Sobey,
And I can't-
Austin Cowell, Nauvoo Expositor,
Yes.
Doppelgangers with Martha Brotherton.
Yeah. Right. Right. This is so insane.
So you're saying there's a chance?
Then-
And I will bet you that they have never seen the actual documents. I will bet you they've never been to church archives or BYU archives and looked at the actual documents. That they're basing everything on these scans you can find online. Now, Dan and myself have handled these actual documents, and we can tell you that the
Not
paper
all
is
of them.
gloss and it's iron gall ink. Yeah, I mean, how many have we looked at, Dan, in our years? I mean, my gosh.
A lot.
A lot, but not the Clayton journals. Is that what you were
A
alluding
lot.
to, Dan?
Clayton journals.
The Holy
Yeah, I
Grail.
got turned down. I asked
Look
every year for 10 years until they finally said, don't ask us ever again.
That's longer than Moroni.
They're coming out soon. They'll be out anytime now. Yeah, yeah.
We know it because they
Probably
said that
Yale's
10
gonna
years
do
ago.
it.
So are those Epstein files.
Joseph
Well-
did not commit suicide.
You mean John Taylor?
No, Joseph Smith. He didn't commit suicide.
Neither
In the
did a
jail
lot
cell.
of people.
Tim, I'm sorry. I think we sidetracked you. What's going on?
No, this to me is so confabulating how these people go through these mental gymnastics to explain things and pick these tiny, tiny things. When Michelle attacked me in my Brigham Young paper, it just drove me up the fucking wall. I just couldn't.
Hey, this
believe
isn't Mormonism After Dark. Watch
Yeah.
the language, pal.
it.
It's late, though.
But, you know, I mean, she invites everybody else, but she doesn't invite me.
I'm sorry, she didn't invite you somewhere?
Well, when she back in November, when she attacked my Brigham Young paper on January 6, 1842, that's the plural marriage date of Agnes Colbert Smith and Joseph. And, Art DeHoyos was the one who decoded it, and I wrote the paper about it and have a lot of documentation to back it up, and she ignores all the documentation and everything else. She didn't even look at it.
Well, she can't because she can't afford to have it proven to her that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy.
She's not a historian.
True. Absolutely. Like I said, she's never seen or handled the original document.
She can if she wants, probably.
Sure, she could. Yeah, I mean, there's something really neat about holding a piece of paper in your hand. I mean, I held Spanish land grants from the 15 and 1600s. BYU has in their collection in my hand, and those are, I mean, you hold this piece of paper and you think, number one, we're lucky that it survived for 200 or 300 years. I mean, that we have this record is pretty much a miracle, because paper was expensive back then and there wasn't a lot of it. I mean, we're lucky we have the records we have.
Yes, paper doesn't just grow on trees.
And I might couldn't. No. Yes.
I'll be here all week.
But I mean, we are so lucky to have what we have. And to abuse it and misuse it like they are, to me.
I was
Go
just listening to Ben Parks.
Mhm.
Parks.
I always forget.
And he
I just call him
was
Ben.
Art.
and he was talking about the Sarah Ann Whitney, the letter there to her parents and to come and see Joseph in hiding, and it instructed them to destroy the letter. And Ben made the point that that they obviously didn't burn it or destroy it like they were instructed, but he says that might be the reason we don't have as much contemporary evidence as we do.
Mm-hmm. Because other people did follow the direction to burn
Yep.
them.
Yeah.
I have a
That's right.
I have a question
Well,
for you guys.
If Clayton,
No, go ahead, Tim. Finish your thought.
if Clayton hadn't gone and dug up the records, we wouldn't have them. And Dean Jesse told me there are probably more records buried around Nauvoo that we do not know about to this day. So go ahead. Anyway.
Here's my question. That's one of the actual plates, Dan?
Yes, in the Chicago Historical Society.
What color is that plate?
It looks gold, but it's brass,
But it would be golden in color.
golden. Yeah.
Yeah. So my point being is it wouldn't have been impossible to fabricate some plates with a golden color, would it?
With the appearance of gold.
Not
Right.
at all.
There's
Yeah, my
red,
point is
brass,
these are
and gold
contemporary to
Yellow.
Joseph Smith.
It's
And
yellow.
other than being smaller and only having one ring, it's the exact same idea.
Yeah, that's where they got the idea.
Make it a little bigger and put 3 rings.
To make this
in it.
fake
Gold
is.
plate.
I don't know how they got the bell shape, but with the ring and stuff, that was probably.
I wonder
what was
if these have a
suggested.
Syriac and Chaldean and
There is some, can't you tell?
Yeah. I look at this and all I see is key ring merchandise.
somebody ought to make these. Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna say somebody ought to make these and sell them with our merchandise. I'd love to get on board that.
So Dan, William Fugate and his compañeros, the guys who come up with this thing, did any of them have like a metalworking shop where they
Well,
could
they
go
had
and
blacksmith made them. I forget the guy's name. I don't even know what they name him, but
blacksmith?
it was a blacksmith, a local blacksmith that made him for them. And he used the technique of covering the brass with like beeswax and then drawing what you wanted the characters to look like. And then you gave it an acid bath so that the acid ate into where the characters are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the ways they identified it as a modern production.
Yes.
Was that microscopically looking at the grooves showed them that it was an acid bath. And it looks like from the picture, it got eaten a little bit too much right there.
Where was that?
That one picture that we were looking at. See how up at the top there's like a hole,
More of an impression.
indentation.
Yes.
That's looks like too much acid right there.
I'm looking on the plates and seeing if I can place it, but I'm not sure that I can.
No.
Yeah. Or something could have happened to it afterward. An impression made by some force. All right. So is that it, everybody?
I think we're done.
I think so.
Thank you, Tim. Have a great night.
Excellent. Excellent.
See you, Tim.
Take it easy.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Tim. We're clocking in at 3 hours tonight, but it's 3 hours here. It's 8:30 where I am, which means it's 9, 10, 11, 24 where Dan Vogel is.
Yes, that's right.
Is it past your bedtime?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And by the way, so everybody knows Dan Vogel has a cluster right now, and it's a growing cluster of relatively short videos dealing with these kind of issues. We played excerpts from some of them tonight, so that's what they look like. And they're really wonderful. And I had seen one. It was a few weeks ago. I was just watching some Dan Vogel stuff, and it was the one about the Kinderhook plate. And I went, oh my gosh, we've got to see if we can get Dan Vogel on the show to talk about this. And that was the germination for tonight's show. So hopefully everybody understands now. You got the throws, you got the punches, you got the kicks, right? And you know how to defend yourself against those polygamy deniers and help them understand that you're not falling for their shtick, because they can talk about all these little details out here, but it's at the root of the tree that they fail, because the roots are sick, the roots are withered, the roots aren't there, and the tree is falling over on their theory. All right, so I'm ready to sign out of here unless either of you have something more to say.
Just come see us in St. George.
St. George, May 10th, the night before Mother's Day. That's why we didn't have it on Sunday, because that's Mother's Day. So this is the night before Mother's Day, May 10th, Saturday in St. George. Thank you, everybody, so much. Looks like we already have 7 tickets sold. They're going fast. Just want to let you know that. Bill's been keeping me apprised in the private chat. So that means there's 13 left. Is that right, Bill?
13 left, yeah, at this point.
Okay, and we'll 20 is all we can account for right now. I don't know if there's any other room. It's basically at a clubhouse. We covered that before. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please remember the new time, only 1 week, this Friday on Good Friday. It'll be 9 o'clock Mountain Time when we're going to start Mormonism After Dark. And then it'll be Good Friday and Easter following. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Until next time, this is Mormonism Live. signing off the air.
Right.